Go. Everybody ready? It's 7 o'clock, so let's call this regular meeting of the Garfield Township Planning Commission to order. First order of business is to recite the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And you're going to take a roll call?
Sure can. McManus.
Here.
Robertson.
Here.
Klein.
Here.
Gustinelli. Here. Fudge.
Here.
You good?
Here.
And Racine.
Here. First item on the agenda is public comment. We actually have two sets of public comment, one now and one for the end of the meeting. So if anybody has anything they want to tell us during public comment, you're welcome to come forward now or come forward later. We just ask that you come to the mic since the meeting's being recorded and tell us your name and address and what you'd like to tell us. And as is so often the case, nobody wants to give us any public comment right now, so we'll close that and move along. Next item is a review and approval of tonight's agenda. If anybody has a conflict of interest, we should hear about that now, and if not, we'll need a motion to approve the agenda with, I believe staff has indicated they're proposing we amend item 9, other business, and add an item called the Kids Creek US 31 buffer for us to discuss toward the end of our evening, if that's so acceptable.
Maybe 9B.
Yes.
I'll make a motion that we approve the agenda as presented with the addition of 9B.
Support.
Any further discussion on that? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Next up is a review of the minutes from the July 26th meeting. Does anybody have any suggested changes to those draft minutes?
Make a motion the minutes be approved.
Support.
Any further discussion on that? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Next up is correspondence. John or Steve, any correspondence we should be made aware of?
In the packet, you have some information on the upcoming Michigan Association of Planning Conference. It's the statewide planning conference, and it rotates where it goes every year, and this year it happens to be at the resort. This is kind of the preliminary agenda, so if anyone is interested in attending, there is a set of sessions that's also geared toward planning commissioners through some of their training. So if anyone is interested, let us know.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Looks like in our packet is the staff report, the monthly regular staff report. Anything you guys want to add to that, or is it pretty much self-explanatory what was in there?
Yeah, that's pretty, if any questions, let us know.
Next up then are reports. Molly, any town board report this evening?
Couple things. Burnley Meadows was approved by the board. There are going to be some street lights added to Kensington West condos that they didn't have in the past. And the board voted to change the way that we approve the rates for water. So the board will be the one deciding. The town board will be the one deciding. And we had a nice presentation by Traverse Connect. They did a feasibility study on our industrial land uses, and they had suggestions for 5 or so different places, and I understand we'll probably cover that in the next meeting. So.
Cool, thank you. Any other commissioners with any reports? Bob, any ZBA report tonight?
No meeting.
Okay. Chris, anything new on Parks and Rec?
We had a meeting Monday night, and we spent some time just considering the budget for Parks and Rec next year.
Thank you. Joe, anything new on the Joint Planning Commission we should hear
I
about?
haven't gotten a notice yet, but we have a meeting next week, right?
Yes, next Wednesday, which will be here in the
okay.
township.
Has that notice gone out? I don't think I've seen it.
No, it'll probably go out tomorrow or Friday.
Okay.
Next Wednesday at the Township.
That's the
It's a
one.
special meeting, yeah.
Special meeting to address the building height, the one we talked about, reconstructing that administration building at the Commons.
Okay, great. Thank you, Joe. Staff report, John or Steve, anything?
Yeah, you have the staff report. Also, we just want to make mention that, you know, that we are underway going through the master plan process. The planning commission meets once a month, the second meeting of the month, which is on the fourth Wednesday of the month here at the Township. And we do have a website where people can follow the information. Steve's got it up there on the screen, so that there are various draft chapters and information. So we populate that as we progress through the process. As Steve mentioned, there's the MAP conference. There is a budget for the Planning Commission for training and education, so feel free to take advantage of that. It's nice having the conference right here at the Grand Traverse Resort, because it's always somewhere in Michigan. It's nice to have it right here in our backyard. And it's fairly well attended, usually about 500 to 600 people. There are professionals like Steve and myself, but there are also plenty of appointed planning commissioners from around the state of Michigan, so it's a good opportunity to get some training. But yes, please let us know, and you don't have to attend the full conference if you want a portion of it. They do have some like single day rates as well. Also just want to mention that we, regarding the Chick-fil-A parcel at the back end, we are getting some movement now finally on the hotel that's planned for the back end of that project. So it's been our observation that it's been operating fairly well. We haven't had any complaints or problems. There is still the issue of that parking, which will be resolved when that hotel goes through. In that particular case, it's a use by right, so the zoning administrator is reviewing that from a staff review process. So we're happy to see that finally moving, because that site has kind of looked unfinished for quite some time now. And that's about it for right now.
Okay, thank you. John, Steve, anything to add? Nope, okay.
That's it?
Moving along, then, on unfinished business, item 6A, it's Planning Department Report 2023-94, the Village of Garfield Special Use Permit. We're going to look at the findings of fact this evening.
Yeah, so this is for the findings of fact for the village at Garfield, proposing 80 units of multifamily housing on Garfield Road, north of Hammond Road. It's roughly about a 15-acre parcel. So with the number of units that are proposing, the density is considerably less. It's roughly about 6 units per acre. They pretty much have met all the requirements that have been presented to them, and we do have the staff review in there. They've addressed some of the landscaping. We did talk about at the last meeting about going to that single entrance drive off of Garfield. I did talk or had communication with the road commission, and they are okay with that, as well as the location of the proposed driveway onto Garfield, so there doesn't seem to be any issues on that. Probably the only item that we have outstanding is something that's a little tricky, but is the wetlands that does cover kind of the north edge of the parcel. We are trying to work, as you know, our requirement, the township requires a 25-foot buffer. We want verification of the delineation of that wetland to identify where that buffer would be located. They have provided a delineation. It's a matter of getting it verified by Eagle. At this point, I have had some exchanges with Eagle. I have not had directly from them, but trying to get an idea on the time frame of that. So that's going to be something that's not necessarily going to be ready in time for this approval, but could be made as a condition of approval for the project and still receive verification. I'm not too concerned on that because I think there's the delineation along with the buffer. There's really nothing that's near to that location at all. That, you know, in terms of any buildings or parking areas or anything like that. There's a fair amount of space between how the buffer is presented on the site plan and those built portions of the site. Everything else is in pretty good shape. I do have to compliment the applicant. This was one of our better packets in terms of site plan sets, because everything was all under one even the lighting plan and everything, the landscaping plan was under, one complete set. So that made it really easy to go through this. The plan sheets were really clear, and it makes our job a lot easier, so.
Are you satisfied with the snow storage situation? I remember at one point you were wondering or ruminating about maybe they would scatter it as opposed to it all being in
Yes.
one place. Did anything change on that?
Yes, they did. They did provide another location, kind of, so they have them at kind of both opposite ends,
Okay,
which to us makes appropriate.
so that works.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Commissioners, we've got a set of proposed findings of fact. It looks like in staff's preliminary review of things, all of those conditions that are required to be met have been met. Does anybody have any specific questions or issues or things they want to talk about on any of those? Everybody okay with them?
I'll make the motion then, that the findings of fact for application SUP 2023-03 as presented in Planning Department Report 2023-94 and being made a part of this motion be adopted.
Support?
Is there any further discussion on that motion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. And before we do the second one, I noticed that we've got, it's called a condition. Item number 2 is waiving the traffic impact report, and I think I've mentioned that before. It seems to me we ought to have that in here, but I don't see that as a condition. They're not providing us with anything. We're providing them with a waiver.
True.
Could you make that as a separate motion?
Well, or one thought that crossed my mind, and I think it comes up in another one, is like maybe right at the beginning, motion, and then we could just use the words that are in item number 2. Motion that the planning commission waives the requirement for a traffic impact report, and then go on with the draft motion, that application, blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
And then there would number the conditions would be 1 through 6 instead of 1 through 7, but, because it seems to me the others are all conditions, but
Okay.
So what's the easiest way of doing that? That was,
So just state that the motion that application SUP 20-23-03 be approved.
okay,
And, let's see,
Or you were saying put it
Maybe-
before that,
I
so.
was thinking you
say-
could slap it right
Yeah.
after the word motion. Motion that the
Oh.
planning
Motion,
commission
yeah.
waives the requirement for a traffic impact report. And then we pick
that-
up with that application, blah, blah.
I make the motion and then you state what you want.
So it would read,
That'd
it would
be
read, motion that the planning commission waives the requirement for a traffic impact report and that application SUP 2023-03 be approved, subject to the following conditions, 1 through 6, as amended, as indicated in planning department report 2023-94.
Perfect, that's exactly
All
what I
right,
wanted.
you make that motion.
I'm making that motion.
Great motion, Joe.
Good job.
And we'll get you that verbiage, yeah.
Is there support for the motion? Support.
All right.
Any further discussion on the motion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries.
Well, John, in the future, how do you want us to handle that?
Well, it just seems like it.
I agree with you, it's not a condition.
It ought to be stated somewhere in a motion that we're waiving that, so that it's clear on the record that we waived it. But it's not really a condition that we're imposing on somebody, it's actually a waiver of.
Right, so should we just make it part of the report earlier? Yes.
well, so the reason this comes up, it's a provision in the ordinance regarding traffic impact reports. And if it's a project that hits that threshold, it can be waived. So we should make some statement, and I don't know if we've always done that, but we'll wordsmith it and come up with.
Right, I have no problem with the waiving that. There's enough traffic studies in that area, but Beta and everything else going on. I don't think
Yeah.
we need more of them. But my point was, if it's not a condition, a future down the road of project, do we make it part of the report itself and just state that we waived it, or do it the way you did it in the future? So it's just something to think
Yeah,
about, so,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a little clunky to have it right at the first point of when you're making a
Right.
motion to approve that you're doing a waiver first,
Seems
but,
clunky. so I'd be-
yeah, but we can figure
Right.
something out.
Could potentially be a separate one. I'm just curious what the actual verbiage on it is.
Oh, we can take a look at it.
Yeah, we're gonna have the same issue in a minute for the next item, but after tonight, maybe staff can figure out a way to wordsmithing it a little easier, but.
Right.
All right, so we'll move along then to item 6B, which is Planning Department Report 2023-95, the 716 Boone Street Special Use Permit Review of the Findings of Fact.
Okay. I'm just gonna get this pulled up. Here we go. Okay. So this is that findings of fact. We've seen this in a couple of your meetings. This is for the proposed photography studio on this site on the corner of Woodmere and Boone. There's an existing site. It's zoned industrial, which is why this is going through special use permit. So there's a lot of sort of existing conditions on this site. There's a few things to mention on since the previous meeting, and one since you actually just mentioned the traffic impact report. I did open up to that section in case we want to figure out how to wordsmith it. There is a section in that for applicability as to when a traffic impact report actually applies. So it's there's sort of 1, 2, 3, 4 scenarios. Any major development, special use permit, or site plan under the following described conditions. A proposed rezoning that could generate 150 more directional trips during the peak hour, or 1,000 or more trips per day. A proposed development that generates 150 more directional trips during the peak hour, or at least 500 trips per day. Proposed development for a 5-acre or larger site, or upon determination by either Director of Planning or Planning Commission that it is necessary. So, based on the information we have on it, I don't think any of those actually meet that threshold. So I don't think even a waiver is needed. I think it just straight up doesn't apply in this case.
Okay.
Because we hadn't actually mentioned it in previous reports, since you have an existing site and it's not generating that much, or that level anyway, because it's such a small site. So. That one, I think you're okay on this. So a couple other things. We talked a little bit last time about the dumpster enclosure. Looking at the language specifically, the only requirement is that if there is a dumpster, that it be in an enclosure, and there's requirements for what that enclosure is. If a dumpster is not needed, it does not require that a dumpster be used. So they determined that just the rollout containers are going to be suitable for that site, and it is a fairly small site, so they're not proposing a dumpster and not showing one on the site plan. So that takes care of that. They provide a cut sheet of the current lighting, so no lighting issues and no changes to the existing lighting are proposed. Still want to talk about a couple things. One being landscaping, and specifically on the east side. This is where there's a little bit of kind of narrow amount of space, and there's some existing gravel. And then there's also a request from the applicant, and there's an email included as an attachment to keep that area as gravel. And we were citing some things in the ordinance to require that parking areas, maneuvering lanes be paved. So they pointed out that it is more of a temporary or occasional loading area for the east side. We actually, after talking with the applicant, double-checked there's a loading section of, there's the division of parking and loading in the ordinance, but there's actually a loading section. It has some of the similar language that it also be paved. The part under parking does allow for a waiver or a reduction in standards from the prepared surface requirements on a temporary basis. And there's some thresholds for that. And so we offered, we first observed as staff, this appears to be used mostly as loading, as stated by the applicant. It is above and beyond the requirements. They already have a loading zone on the west. They already have enough parking in their main parking area. So they already have parking and loading covered. This is sort of just, it's an existing condition that's above and beyond, and there's an overhead door on the east side. Traditionally has had access to it. So the sort of two things on this side is we're going to need some amount of landscaping as part of this review, and then the rest of it, is there enough on a temporary basis to allow it to continue as gravel, or does it need to be paved sooner than later? And that's up for Planning Commission to discuss. There's a lot on page 7 of the report that speaks to that specifically. But otherwise, anything else on the site plan I think was mostly addressed since the previous time that you saw this. So,
Does staff have any recommendation regarding that gravel topic?
I mean, we kind of went back and forth on it a little bit. It's sort of kind of given that it's existing condition, and a lot on the site is just there is a lot of existing conditions based on it's an older site. But we kind of seeing that it's primarily loading, that loading areas, according to that part of the ordinance, are supposed to be paved. Now, since it's above and beyond what they already have as a paved loading area, and this is a little more occasional, we put in some language we could potentially use as sort of allowing for temporary, that it's more like occasional loading, it's kind of an extra maneuvering to get to that part of the site. Some of the snow storage is proposed for the back part of the site. And we did put some language at the bottom of page 7 that we could insert as a condition, sort of the long last sentence. And we'll reiterate, it also does still say temporary basis, so at some point down the line, it is intended that it would be paved. It could be either like concrete or asphalt or pavers, some kind of hard surface.
Commissioners, what do you think?
I don't think you can put in sometime in the future, because that never gets here.
Okay.
Had those problems before.
Mm-hmm.
Either they have to do it or they don't.
Okay.
Sometime in the future, I don't think makes it.
Well, that
Molly,
was
do you
my
have a thought?
question too, just, so what determines down the line? What's gonna trigger that?
That's sort of a difficult thing to do. We were trying to come up with a threshold to do that. We gave an example, like observed as occupied by a vehicle at least once per week, 3 consecutive weeks, something that you could observe if people are out doing code enforcement rounds, to observe that. A lot of detail in here, it just gets tricky to kind of accurately track a threshold like that.
Do you think this picture that we have up here is a normal situation? So you've got a dozen cars packed back there on the back side of it?
Right, and I think that's one of the main reasons that, so the other part of this is getting some landscaping right now on that side of the site. It's sort of gravel for most of it, so getting some amount of defined landscaping will sort of discourage that, but leaving some amount that they can access the east side of the building is sort of what's proposed.
Do you know if that parking that we're seeing there is associated with this business?
It'd be associated with that building in some fashion. I don't know specifically which, but yeah, it would be, it's on the same side of that as that building.
Well, this picture couldn't be better at showing exactly what we want to prevent and eliminate. So, what is preventing us from requiring a specific amount of landscaping, an amount of it, and in the exact locations that will absolutely prevent that from happening? I mean, if it needs additional landscaping
Yep.
in specific areas to prevent all these cars from being parked off-site, we've determined it's against the ordinance to do that. Rather than have our code enforcement chase it
Yeah.
and look at it, let's just require something that will actually make it, unless they drive over trees, to park there. I have no problem with requiring additional requirements of landscaping to prevent the parking from being there.
That measured out to about roughly 30 feet between that side of the building and the parcel line. The buffer requirement as normal would be 20 feet wide. That does make getting access to that building a little narrower. So as staff, we were thinking 15 and 15, have the landscaping be 15 wide and leave them 15 to be able to access the building on that side.
Access the loading door.
And access the loading, yeah.
There isn't supposed to be any parking anymore on the east side.
And no parking, it's just strictly to get access to that door. There's no designated parking on that side.
Other thoughts? It certainly doesn't sound like there's a lot of enthusiasm for kicking this down the road and worrying about triggering some kind of future change. We ought to get it right tonight,
Right.
whatever we want to do.
Mm-hmm.
What are people's inclinations about what ought to happen there? Molly?
If they need the extra parking that's there, then they should say so, and we should figure out how to make that, accommodate that. If they don't, and we are absolutely not going to let them have the parking there, then do it the way you suggested, with a small area where they could bring a truck in and go.
Mm-hmm. Based on what they provide in the or in their application as descriptions of the uses, and since they're adding new on this end cap, based on what they've described, what they've got in front of the building will meet their parking
Take care of
requirement.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we, if we take care of the parking by doing the landscaping, then that covers it, but what about the fact that the loading area is not gonna be paved? How is the best way of handling that?
I think what John was suggesting is that just require it
Require it right now?
Mm-hmm.
There's no chance that you could include that in the landscaping and have them, instead of having gravel, which is, if you have them use a stone that can be driven on, and then have that stone be right part of their landscaping, in that 15 feet closest to the building. I like a crushed stone, call it landscape, and then they get by without paving that. It's just a thought, and they could drive on it.
Is that, I don't know if that would be acceptable in their landscaping? I mean, it's something we could
Well,
check.
a lot of
but-
plantings, you'll see that same
Oh,
crushed
like-
stone around plantings, so it's
Oh,
a
yeah, like-
landscaping product.
Oh,
and
just as a
you can drive on it
landscaping or-
too.
okay.
So it's killing two birds with
I
one
see what you're
stone.
saying.
But,
Mhm.
Such a small area, I wouldn't think it'd be terribly pricey to get it paved or put pavers down, would it?
I don't know specifically,
Especially
but
if you
yeah,
talk
it's-
about landscaping the east 15 feet, you've only got another 15 feet between the building and the landscaping area.
Mhm.
And it's not exactly a huge space that we're looking at.
Mhm.
It's just, we hate to make somebody do something that they don't seem to see a need for, but what we've always got to remember is somebody 5 years down the road is going to point to that and say, you let him have a gravel, why can't I? And that's what we got to make sure we don't fall into that trap.
I mean, I guess the way to not have to pave it is to not use it as a truck door.
Mhm.
Basically just shut down the garage door and eliminate the access. If you eliminate the access and landscape it all,
Mhm.
then it's not necessary to conform to the ordinance. But I think, John, we're kind of stuck. There's, and in particular, there's already, for this building, one loading door. And so there's this other loading door in the end that's non-conforming, and the fact that it needs a special use permit requires that we make it conform. And if it's not a loading door, then it doesn't need to conform.
But
Yeah,
then
in
the whole
their-
thing would have to be landscaped.
Right, right. In their email, they indicated they wanted to maintain access to that door. So otherwise, yeah, that would have been the other kind of option to do it.
Access,
Yeah.
or, I mean, it's a matter of, do you want to be able to back a truck up to it and use it as a truck door? Then it needs to
Yeah,
be.
what I
it's a loading
understood it
door.
as, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you want a sidewalk going there, I agree with you. I mean, it could be a little gravel sidewalk,
Mm-hmm.
or, a little gravel path, if that meets the ordinance.
Mm-hmm.
If it were to be landscaped, they'd have to do the typical landscape buffering materials in the, say, that eastern 15 feet. Could we allow them to just have grass, for example, on the west 15 feet?
I think
So
if
they've still got this door that presumably they're not gonna use with trucks backing up to it, because that'd wreck the grass, but they could get so close to it, they can schlep things off and on the truck and through that door if they want to.
I mean, in theory, it's my understanding that they want to at least maintain the ability to back up trucks to that door if needed.
Well, but then we got our problem with,
Right.
you gotta have it paved.
If you'd like to speak to that, please say so, yes.
Is that okay?
Sure.
Yep.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Ryan Wells, I'm an agent for Leasewell Incorporated. I have my mother, June Wells, she's the president of Leasewell Incorporated here this evening as well. We don't need use of the overhead door. I was trying to preserve the use of the door. It's been in continuous use for 53 years. There's 3 units in the building. Each unit, the loading door on the west side is for that unit. This door was the loading door for the east unit. That's why there's 2 doors. We don't need the loading and unloading of the door. I was just trying to preserve it so that for future tenants, because we've been landlords for 35, 40 years, that if the photography studio is not there long-term, that we would still have access to the door. I'm hoping that the photography studio tenants will be here for a long time. They have no use of this overhead door, so we don't need to have the overhead door.
Okay.
How would you like to then see the land if we can't leave it just as gravel? What would you like to see it
I
become?
appreciate the question. My biggest concern, Steve misspoke when he said it's used for some snow. You see how large our parking lot is, which is all asphalt and concrete. All that snow is moved to the east side of the building.
Mm-hmm.
That entire area is covered in 3 feet tall by 35 feet wide and 50 feet long of snow. That's where we push all the snow into that area.
Mm-hmm.
So if you require us to put grass there, the snow is going to ruin the grass. And I can tell you this too, that we don't have the budget and we're not interested in paying for paving all of that. We didn't go into this with that understanding. We did as best we could with due diligence. We've met with John and Steve a dozen times. We've met with our engineer. We've tried to formulate a plan that works for everybody. But for a tenant to take 1/3 of the building, it's just feasibly not responsible to spend tens of thousands of dollars in asphalt and landscaping and all these improvements. That's why we made sure that stormwater wasn't an issue. We made sure that the threatened 8-foot wide or 10-foot wide and 80-foot long green span down Boone Street wasn't an issue. I only heard for the first time at this last township meeting of a requirement to pave that area. And so we're happy to get along. We want to comply. But we just wouldn't spend tens of thousands of dollars. And to answer your question, it's about $8,000 in asphalt.
Okay. So if it sounds like you don't really need the use of it as an overhead door, if that is made clear in the materials,
Mm-hmm.
then do we have to require anything at all with respect to what is on the ground within the non-landscape buffer portion between the building and that?
If it's not a paved area, we require some form of landscaping, whether it's grass or, some type of plant materials or something of that nature. If it's left as it is, it's going to remain a parking area. From our observations, snow does not destroy grass, so that I don't believe that's quite the issue.
The plow trucks, John, the
Well,
plow trucks
the
push
plow
the
trucks
snow.
aren't necessarily pushing all the way to the back. So you could provide landscaping there. If you leave it as gravel or dirt as it is, we're gonna have what you see there potentially occurring because there's nothing there that precludes people from parking in that area.
I would be happy to monitor the parking personally. I told John and Steve day one, because they said we couldn't park anywhere on the east side of the building. We had to only use the existing 15 parking spots on the front. According to the zoning and the requirements for parking, that's ample parking for the tenants that are there. And so I've said from day one, we went to a single row parking. I didn't know that that was causing heartburn at the township level. Mundo's did that. Mundo's has not been there for 8 months now. We've eliminated the double parking. We're restriping it to make it single parking. And we've said from right all the way through, no parking on the east side.
That's what I thought.
Okay.
So given what we're hearing, how do we approach this? Some landscaping has to happen on the east side, it sounds like. What do we have to require? How much?
Well, there's the landscape buffer, but then there's the rest of the ground that's not necessarily part of that buffer. Like Steve was mentioning, it's 30 feet from that building to the lot line there.
There's
So there's a
approximately
20-foot
30 feet.
buffer requirement per the ordinance, but the ordinance also stipulates if it's not going to be a paved area or if it's not covered by a building, it's required to have some form of plant material or landscaping or, stone or something of that nature that works with what the landscaping portion of the ordinance requires.
The zoning ordinance does say that the planning commission and the planning director retains the rights, the option to waive the requirements or to trade options, which I told John I'd be more than happy to plant some more trees or bushes along the fence line if that appeases them. We're happy to do that. But my understanding, and I can pull it up, that it does say that the planning director and the planning commission retains the right to waive those requirements. That's not an absolute.
We're talking about the landscaping portion. So that in case of this, it's the approval authority is the planning commission. So
Does the
only
planning commission retain the right to waive it?
under certain conditions.
Okay.
That's
So
what
I
I'd
don't-
have to find out what the conditions are that would allow that.
And I don't believe the conditions here apply to that.
Could he get enough trees near the property line to meet that ordinance and then leave the rest grass and then actually push the snow out on the grass? Would that,
I think that would make sense. And in the, there is a site plan in there. So they did propose landscaping on the east side, and I think the amount of trees proposed meets that part of the landscaping. What we're talking about specifically is the amount of distance. If they, as you were just saying, if the rest of it's grass, it actually would then meet the distance. It would not have any lingering space that could be seen as overflow parking or as gravel. It would basically allow it to be grass, and you can still use it for snow storage.
Right
That
across
sounds-
Boone Street, where those retention basins are, those are grass, and that's where the snow gets stored. So I think you could put snow on grass. I do it at my house, so I'm assuming that would work. And if you can just seed it and put grass in there and
So
see
there's a,
that meets your
there's,
requirement.
there is the requirement, this is in the zoning ordinance, it's section 530J, required vegetation. All areas not covered by buildings, parking areas, driveways, walkways, pedestrian plazas, or other pedestrian-oriented impervious surfaces or water surfaces shall be replanted with ground cover at a minimum. Ground cover may include maintained lawn area, native wildflowers, vines, grasses, rushes, sedges, or ferns as identified within the ISN planting guidelines, or wood chips or rock, provided that this type of material does not exceed 20% of the total of any individual landscaped area.
Anywhere in the ordinance, you have a landscape buffer. Talking about a landscape buffer, it's required of 20 feet, right? 20-foot buffer.
Right.
And you mentioned that we might have the leeway to go down 15. Anywhere in our ordinance is off-site parking allowed in a buffer? I don't believe it
think
is.
so.
I don't believe it is.
Okay,
yeah.
so that's what's happening here. There's a buffer there, and there's 8 cars parked in the buffer. So there's as many cars parked in the buffer as in the parking lot. So how do we eliminate that parking completely without putting the onus on our code enforcement to keep driving by there and doing that. I mean, we need to eliminate the ability to park there.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's my biggest concern.
Isn't that taken care of, though, in the draft motion, which we haven't made yet? But there shall be no parking in areas not shown as parking lots on the site plan. And I think you said the site plan just shows parking on the north side. Okay,
As it's
so that-
depicted, yep.
So
I think that the condition is you're not parking there. So somebody's violating their permit if they park there.
Could that be gated off?
Oh, he needs it for snow plowing.
Yeah, maybe you're supposed to wide enough for plowing.
May I ask when this photo was taken? Do we know what the circuit? Because I know nobody's parked there like that for at least 9 months.
That aerial, I don't know the specific date on it. It was at least when Wendy's was built, so it's within the last year or two at least. I believe it was potentially 2022. That's when the last time we got aerial imagery, pictometry for the township. It was
I
approximately
believe so,
last
because
year.
the trash totes are still on that west side of the building, and they've been gone for a while.
But I think what I'm hearing, Mr. Wells, you're saying nobody's parking on the east side now anyway, and if the language says there won't be any parking there, you're fine with that. And I think that addresses the concern that we're gonna have a constant enforcement problem. Somebody's clearly violating their permit if they park there.
Every photo I've seen of the building, either from the front or from the aerial, shows people parking there, so unless they're all.
That was when
old,
Mundo's-
Then I don't,
There's gonna be more landscaping added, though, isn't there?
that's what I'm saying. Like, can we position the required landscaping in a way that will eliminate the ability to kill two birds with one stone? We're gonna eliminate, we're gonna maintain, we're gonna require additional landscaping. So let's put that landscaping in an area, in a spot where it will eliminate the ability to park there. Then we kill two birds with one stone.
I would agree, and I think the way Joe Robertson suggested, where what's in the site plan with the amount of trees proposed is appropriate, but just instead have that whole side just be grass, and then plant the trees that are gonna be there. That would take care of both making it grass, still allowing for snow storage, and removing it as gravel. Keeps it as pervious area, which is appropriate for the site as well.
How's that sound to you, Mr. Wells?
How wide of a green span?
I would say that whole, you
Building
said
to the
that's
lot
everything
line.
that's the gravel right now.
You want 35 feet of grass on that side.
If it's
Isn't
not
30
gonna,
feet?
if it's not gonna be used for, 30 feet from here, is it feasible to seed that side of the building?
The snow plows don't just push it to the east. They push it to the east and then they push it to the south.
Okay.
I don't know. You see how big the parking lot is?
I see, yep.
And when we have heavy snows, which we often do, it's a lot of snow. And we have to maintain the parking lot.
Absolutely.
I gotta be honest, I mean, there's no place in our township where we would allow, or do allow, or have paved areas. And I think what you're proposing is you wanna leave it gravel so that you can plow snow on it in the winter.
Correct.
And it's a non-starter. It's a no. And it doesn't exist anywhere in our township.
I understand that, Mr. Duguid. You had also said at the last meeting that you didn't know why you were putting us through the process to go through a special use permit application because there's such a small, low-impact tenant with no exterior modifications or interior modifications to the building. They're a photography studio. It fits the township's wanting of those types of businesses in that area. And so we're doing our best to support them. We're just here to support the tenant. The tenant's the ones that are actually applying for the special use application.
I understand, and I did say what I said, and I would like to find whatever we can do for you. But at the end of the day, we have an ordinance, we have to enforce it. You're the landlord. Your building has to conform to the zoning ordinance.
If we don't, but only if we move forward with the special use application. If we don't proceed with the special use application, then we don't have to conform with bringing the building up to code, correct?
And we can't get into the situation as a governing body where we're making special rules to accommodate a certain tenant.
No, I understand that. I'm just saying there's a bookend that the only reason we're here is because of the special use application, which triggers the township's ability to bring the building up to code. And so we were looking for latitude to minimize the monetary requirements to do things when it's such a low impact use that it's kind of silly. You laughed at the last meeting, and there was 2 other board members that said, we're not sure why we're doing
I
this.
don't think we discussed the need to leave a gravel area so you could plow snow into it year-round.
I know, I'm just communicating that this evening, that we're not putting our flag in that we have to have a loading, unloading. That's just not true. I was trying to preserve the longevity of the use of an existing 10-foot
And with
overhead
regard
door.
to that issue, should you have a new tenant in the future who needed to have a loading and unloading area, I think your effort to preserve it was maybe misplaced, because it's still there. If you have a tenant in the future that would require it, then you as a landlord would need to provide a paved surface to conform to the ordinance. I think regardless of whether you got a special use permit or not.
My understanding that the only reason that we're discussing
No, you would still
those,
be in violation of the ordinance by not having a paved access.
that wouldn't be grandfathered in under just a continuous use under the previous requirements?
Perhaps.
I
I
think
think
so.
we're just trying to split hairs here, and if you can't, you're right, I would like to try and conform, I'm sorry, I would like to try and help you out, but I feel like we're arguing over, if you can't see this area with grass, and help us conform to the ordinance, then we can't, I think we're already offering to narrow the buffer, correct?
Potentially, and, but if it's all grass, I think it would, at that point, not even be narrowed, so.
We offered to do
We did
10
it-
10 feet of grass between the neighbor's property and our property. And then the remainder to be left as road gravel. And we're agreeable that we won't use the overhead door and we won't allow any parking there.
I don't think we have the latitude to allow that. I mean, we're not horse trading because of what, this is the law, it's the ordinance. I want to try and accommodate this to the extent that I can, but I think some accommodations have tried to have been made, but what you're asking us to do, and you're thinking that we're the bad guys here because we won't we won't bend the ordinance. We can't bend the ordinance.
No, I don't at all think you guys are bad guys.
We like you.
We're trying to be feasibly responsible and not to expend money on things that don't really, they make them different, but they don't necessarily make them better for the use of the building, because the tenants have to use the building and make money and pay taxes, and we need to make money to pay the bank. So we're not trying to cause any problems or heartaches with you. We appreciate your attention to this, but we are being fiscally responsible of where do we spend money, and so I was under the impression that you did have the latitude to minimize and to reduce it from 20 feet to.
Are we clear on what we have? Can we just go through what we have the latitude? Because what I heard was, we don't have the latitude to allow anything but grass.
What we have is latitude on landscaping, which I think is what Mr. Wells was just speaking to, was the latitude on landscaping. What we have less or potentially no latitude on is the prepared surface. So, like, what we're talking about on the east side, if there's anything, there's either paved or grass, but no gravel. I don't think we have ability to allow gravel,
Right.
especially on a
So-
long-term basis.
So if there's a loading dock there, it has to be paved. If there's not a loading dock in use, it does not have to be paved. And if it's not paved, then it has to be grass. And that's just how the ordinance reads. We have no latitude to grant something otherwise. And there's no case that supports whatsoever that snow plowing somehow is a condition which warrants something other than grass. So,
Understood. We're just trying to keep the use and the functionality of the building so everyone can make money and keep being good citizens. So that's fine. We'd be happy to bring topsoil in and grass seed.
Okay. There we go.
Then how much of a buffer on the far east part of the property where those 3 white cars are parked right now?
Mhm.
Is that, we're looking at the landscape on that the way it's on this plan, or what are we looking at there?
So yeah, I think if they would agree to then put topsoil and grass seed down on that, and then do the landscaping trees as proposed in the site plan that they submitted, it would actually be wider than, it would fill that 30 feet, it would be wider than 20 feet, so it wouldn't require a landscaping waiver at that point, and it would fulfill that requirement. Mhm.
And
So you're saying we could provide for a waiver for for the plantings to be in a narrower area, correct?
I don't think he's using the
I
word
don't think a
waiver.
waiver is necessary if they're willing to grass seed the whole thing, and they have plantings that are in that area generally. I don't think a waiver is needed at this point.
And to be clear,
Mhm.
looking out for your future, none of those plantings would encroach so that you have a tree 15, 10 years from now where you would need to put in a truck dock. So you're okay with it?
That'd be fine.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep. I see what you're saying. Yeah, that makes sense. Mhm.
Are there any other issues that need to be wrestled with? If not, again, in this report, staff has drafted findings of fact, and in staff's draft, they're showing all of the requirements that we have to find to be met, staff believes have been met. Does anybody have any specific issues or questions or things they want to talk about on any of those proposed findings of fact? I'm seeing a lot of heads shaking no.
I'll make the motion that the findings of fact for application SUP 2023-02 is presented in Planning Department Report 2023-95 and being made a part of this motion be adopted.
Support.
Any further discussion on that? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries.
And I'll make the next motion, but I want to review the conditions, because the first condition, a waiver is granted to allow for east landscaping buffer width to be reduced to 15 feet.
I would strike that entire
That
one.
out.
We can strike that entire thing.
Mm-hmm. And I would suggest also striking number 4.
Oh, yeah.
Which spoke to paving that, but if that is not needed, then we can strike that.
Any other changes that you can see from the draft motion besides eliminating condition 1 and condition 4? Then I guess that would
think
change
there's-
the items then would be numbers 1 through 6, right?
1 through 6 as amended.
Now, John, just a question for you. So, Don Syke, so, in the future, if a tenant comes in there and needs access to that door,
Mhm.
they just have to come back and ask for an amendment to the site plan and then pave a portion of that 30 feet to accommodate the door use?
Correct.
Okay. And is that, has to come back to this board, or is that administrative review?
We could probably do that as an administrative, just because it's based on percentage of area.
Okay.
So if it's,
So we're not eliminating use of that door
15%.
forever. We're just, we're not eliminating that use of that door.
Right.
We're just
Correct.
saying if that door is ever gonna be used for loading and unloading, then a portion of that 30 feet, up, potentially up to 15
of it, right?
Yep.
could be paved and access the door. It wouldn't even have to be all the way back, just to where the door is.
Right.
Right, okay. So just so we know that it's not the impression that we're eliminating all use of that door forever.
Correct.
That's not what we're doing.
Why don't we make sure that ends up in the minutes, that we discussed that being a minor amendment, so staff in the future would have some direction.
Administrative amendment, yeah. That we
Regarding an
can.
administrative amendment.
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
As long
All
as-
right,
as
so
long as that's
motion that
reflected in the
application.
minutes.
Oh, Sorry?
Sorry, as long as that's reflected in the minutes, there's no need to tweak the motion any further.
I think
on
it
that.
can just be
No,
reflected in
and-
the minutes.
And it would meet our standards for making amendments, whether it's administrative, minor, or major anyway. So depending on who's making changes at that time, that portion of the ordinance would dictate the process by which we would review that.
Fire away, Chris.
Motion that application SUP 2023-02 submitted by Jamie Kirschner and Nicole Martin for a special use permit for a professional studio at 716 Boone Street, parcel 05-135-00800 be approved, subject to the following conditions, items 1 through 6, as indicated in the Planning Department report 2023-95.
As amended.
And as
As
amended.
amended.
As amended, thank you.
Support.
Any further discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you very much.
Thank
We
you.
do
Good luck.
appreciate it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have some follow-up information, we'll be in touch. Believe Robertson, who seconded the motion?
Well, Klein did.
Klein, okay.
All right, moving along, the last item under unfinished business is Planning Department Report 2023-96, Bish's RV, a site plan review and access review. John or Steve, who's going to take us through this one?
I will take us through this one. I believe we have some of the applicant team here. They had requested to, oh, yes. What is the address on it? It's easy to just type in there. 705 North US 31. Zoom out a little bit so we get some context. So yes, the applicant had requested this be delayed to this month so they could have someone in attendance. We did just have a discussion, but took no action at the last meeting. So this is the former TCRV, now Bish's RV, and to review it is coming before Plan Commission. It would normally be just administrative site plan review. They are requesting an additional access to Meadow Lane Drive, and that additional access is subject to review by Plan Commission in accordance to certain specific standards as listed in the ordinance. And the zoning administrator forwarded the entire site plan review as part of that, which they also have a provision to do that. So the first part of the review talks specifically about the proposed additional access. As you can see in the aerial, there is that secondary access in the back. We continue to found that we have not found a site plan or previous approval that had that on there specifically. And they're within the specific standards to be granted additional access. Staff put our comments down on each one of those specific standards. If we aren't finding anything that would meet that threshold. It's one where it's an all must be met. So it is not just meet one of these standards, it is meet all of them. So we can have specific discussion on that. But then on the site plan specifically, they provided an updated site plan and addressed some of the things that we had initially talked about last time. A couple specific things to mention specifically are, I just want to double check this. One, they did agree that they're willing to merge the two parcels. This is over two different tax ID parcels to actually merge them together. They're willing to do that. Part of the proposal is also to add some fencing on the site. And they actually pointed out, we did double check there, I believe last time we talked about using the building line to define like the front yard. There's actually a definition specifically for building line. I think we were interpreting that as based on the constructed, the physical building, but it's actually based on the minimum yard setbacks. It's not the physical building itself. Basically, so the way the fencing was kind of, how was it specifically stated? The height of a fence is limited, and they were proposing 6-foot chain link fence, and it was in the front yard, it cannot be more than 4. But based on definition, the front yard is actually only the required front yard, so it could actually be in front of the building. However, there's also specific standards in the that fencing section on. It says chain link, as in terms of material, chain link may be acceptable when not in prominent view from a public street and provided a vegetative screen of living plant materials incorporated to provide screening and vegetative enhancement. Chain link shall not incorporate slats for screening. So they're still proposing chain link on a good portion of the site, and they do have landscaping proposed along both US 31 and Meadow Lane Drive. We kept going to as staff, though, looking at the when not in prominent view from a public street, and looking at some of the other fences around, or some of the other sites around the township. Some of the ones with fences do have some kind of like evergreen plantings kind of right along the fence to help make it more of a vegetative and fencing screening. But a lot of other sites don't incorporate a lot of like this amount of fencing that's proposed. So I think this is something a little bit different than we've come across. Thinking of some of the other like vehicle dealerships, there's another RV dealership in the township. There's sort of limited examples of fencing, and the ones that are have like the shorter kind of wrought iron fence, which is proposed along the frontage on 31. So there are some comments specifically on that, and actually to provide some of that vegetative screening, or alternatively use a different material for the fencing in certain spots, especially the in prominent view of a public street. So just wanted to comment specifically on that. Otherwise, there's just a few details. Landscaping, they adjusted based on the comments and discussion from last time, and also the proposed amount of the site that's being upgraded. There is that provision to kind of do a percentage based on percentage of how much the site is being adjusted or improved. But otherwise, I think addressed a lot of the things that were brought up in the first letter, and otherwise, just sort of these couple outstanding issues. I'm going to see what Planning Commission has to comment on that.
In your report, I think you indicated that the only thing you're requiring extra landscaping-wise was additional evergreens along the east buffer. But as I'm looking at page 8 of your report, it looks like there's a shortage in the north buffer as well. But I'm not sure if there's a typo there, or if there isn't a typo there, then probably that needs to get added into the conditions, doesn't it?
They had 2 existing, they documented their existing trees that are there.
But it says, do you get enough credit for that to comply then, where they've only got 4 large trees instead of 12?
Yeah, we observed, they documented 2 existing canopy, so it would be a 1 to 4 credit, and if there's 2 of them, there's 2 times.
So you do the math for us. Does that meet the requirement of the north boundary?
Yeah, if they
That's
have,
what I need to hear.
yeah, if they have 2 existing, they get a 1 to 4 credit at each of them. They get credit for 8 for those 2.
All
So
right.
8 plus 4
So
would
they
be
got it.
12.
Okay.
Yeah.
In the future, I think that'd be helpful if that's clear to us in
Yeah.
our report that
Mhm.
that I has been done.
Sorry about that. Yep.
Okay.
We'll clarify it. No.
So you're looking for input from the commission on the fence and the landscaping around the fence issue you talked about.
Yeah.
Anything else that you're calling out that you want us to be looking at for sure?
There's a couple of just other things. I'm looking at the draft motion, just some details needing to be provided. Even with clarifying the definition of front yard, there was still some chain link connecting at a certain point that was in the front yard, so it still needs to be brought back behind that front yard setback line. Just making sure details of both the enclosure and gate are there, some clarification on lighting, but otherwise, I think those are the smaller, like, achievable ones that we typically will do on follow-up on some of these site plans.
I'm looking at page 9 of the report.
Mhm.
Toward the bottom, you talk about snow storage. Township engineer's gonna look at that, but has that been successfully dealt with yet?
I didn't follow up specifically with them, more of just in previous site plans, I remember seeing that is often where snow storage is used on bigger sites. Some of it's just making sure that it will be able to handle it from an engineering perspective.
So it's
Just sort of deferring to, as part of stormwater review, that can be handled.
Okay, and then the next sentence that you had was something about a section 552 and a small loading space. Is that some detail that has to be dealt with here?
It is shown near the enclosure.
Oh, it is shown, okay,
Yeah.
so you're all set there.
Yep.
All right. Commissioners, what are your thoughts about the fencing landscaping topic that Steve was talking with us about? Is there anything that shows where the fence goes and where you're talking about the fence maybe being an issue and/or landscaping needed to be
Yeah.
added there?
We can pull up the site plan specifically on screen here.
We've got a site plan in our packet, but my eyes can't read most of it.
Find one that's actually the site plan. Is this the site
The
plan?
C2 point.
Steve, as you're
C2O.
looking for that.
Yeah, C2.0.
Pulling it up.
There it is. Yep.
You're saying that the front yard is anything in front of the front face of the building, correct?
That's what I thought it was. It's actually it's just the required setback. There is a definition of building line. I had interpreted building line as the front face of the building,
Okay.
but there's actually a definition of building line
And
in the
so
ordinance.
they're designating, and I'm reading on the site plan, they're designating Meadow Lane Drive as their front yard.
Because that's their
And-
road right away.
Both would be, if,
It's like a
Yeah.
corner
And
lot.
both are front, I see, both are indicated as front yards. So basically, anything inside that 40-foot setback has to be a decorative fence. And then once they hit the 40-foot setback, it can be a chain link fence.
based
the
on
ordinance.
that, but then there's also the part in the fencing material,
Yeah.
chain link may be acceptable when not in prominent view from a public street. So it's sort of those two things together.
So there's an ambiguity there that you're asking us, we have some latitude to provide?
So I
Or,
think the part that there's still a little bit in the front yard, this front yard setback being shown here on the dashed line, it's connecting up here, so pulling it back to that line, absolutely, based on the front
Mhm.
yard. Further back, is that considered still in prominent view, or if it had some screening with some additional vegetation, would that be less in prominent view? This one seems like there's a little bit of leeway
but
to it,
they are providing a 4-foot iron fence along US 31.
which is this, let's move this out of the way.
But then there's a taller fence behind it
Yep.
that basically cordons off different portions of their, a 6-foot fence, 6 foot's chain link.
Which
This-
one are you showing there, Steve, with your
That
arrow going
is
up and down?
that's the 4-foot
All right.
iron,
All right,
and then the chain link starts here.
okay.
And then other parts of the site have chain link as well, back here.
Yeah, there's basically a chain link that goes all the way along, approximately 33,
Mhm.
almost 100 and, almost 100 and some, 120 feet back from the edge of their pavement.
Mhm.
They've got a chain link fence.
Mhm.
So you're asking us what's prominent and what's not prominent?
And what would be appropriate to make it less prominent? It could be landscaping, it could be using some other materials that are not chain link, which the prominent view requirement would not apply to.
Has the applicant indicated what they would like to do with respect to that? Right, either change the material or add landscaping, or debate whether it's a prominent view?
Not specifically, the representative of the applicant's here if they'd like to speak to anything on this.
How's it going?
Hello.
I'm Julian with Fish's RV. As far as that, I know that we are willing to do whatever is easiest for everybody, and I'm not sure whether vegetation on it or just a different material would be best in this situation. To be completely honest with you, I got told about this about 2 hours ago. and
Okay,
so,
no worries. Thanks for joining us.
Just want to be honest with you guys.
Yeah.
This is my first meeting, so I
Yeah.
moved here about 3 months ago. I'm the new GM, but
Okay.
yeah, so.
Yeah. I'm actually just curious, is it sort of policy across the company to do fencing as part of, like, for security reasons? Because I'm just thinking, for some of the other sites around here, like, we looked at, like, some of the other RVs, some of, like, the vehicle dealerships, like, we're not seeing a lot of sites that have fencing kind of all around, but if that's been,
So,
yeah.
right down Meadow Lane is the trailer park home, the large one right down there. I can't remember the name of it.
Meadow Lane
Meadow
Village?
Lane.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
We've actually had quite a lot of theft out of our RVs, and even we lock them every single night. We go out, we unlock them in the morning, lock them at night, and they're breaking into the RVs. I'm not trying to
Right.
put it on them, but somebody is. The fencing is definitely going to help with that.
Okay.
As well as just overall help with the flow of traffic in the dealership.
Okay.
Well, it seems to me I'd call that a prominent view. It's right on front
Yeah.
of 31. So if the fencing ought to stay, sounds like maybe there's a good reason for it. It sounds like Julian's also willing to put in some landscaping. So maybe we can clarify what kind of landscaping ought to go there to take care of things.
Okay. Can also pull up the landscaping specifically, so I have to zoom out to know what page I'm on here.
Would McAllister behind there and the boat place next door do for fencing? They have chain link?
You mean like Action Water Sports?
Action Water Sports, and then McAllister's back there just to the west of them.
Oh, yeah.
They both have well, I know McAllister has fences. I don't know if Action does.
Action does. On the front, they got kind of like a wrought iron type thing with some block posts that they've used, and then it's chain link on the sides and the back.
Did they do anything with landscaping? They just,
Well, I think, yeah, because that prominent view facing 31, that's where they did kind of like a wrought iron type of
they
fencing.
were okay in the back with the.
Yeah.
just the-
Do we need to
Right.
get specific about the landscaping? I'm looking at your draft motion, and item 4 talks about shall include additional landscaping to provide enhanced screening per that section of the ordinance. Do we have to get more precise or specific than that? If we do, we do, but if we don't, you've already got that language in your draft motion.
It's a good question. So, and
One
we were also
addition.
trying to wrestle with this too. I think, at least when I read it, I think it sort of implies you have some sort of screening right at the fence to soften it up. But I think it can also work in tandem with other proposed landscaping that's actually up at the street itself. and sort of the site layout itself. Like even on the Meadow Lane Drive site, there's more like, that's some of where their display lot is. So the fence is kind of behind all of that.
Yeah, it'd be nice if we
Yeah.
don't have to micromanage what they do for landscaping, as long as it conceals the fence from prominent view.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose the flip side of that is it wouldn't be very cool for you if you guys planted certain things, and then somebody here says that doesn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, I don't want to cause either of those problems.
And I'm willing to just do whatever we need to do to make everybody happy. I'm totally open to whatever we need to do.
oh, sorry. Go ahead.
But
I think the idea is that we don't wanna see a 6-foot tall chain link fence going down 37 or coming around on Meadow Lane. So however you disguise that, or hide it, or whatever, I mean, we need to see a plan that, but that's what we don't wanna see, is
Absolutely.
just a 6-foot tall chain link fence there.
I promise you, the last thing I want surrounding my dealership is a chain link fence. I really don't. It's not a great look, but unfortunately, its purpose here is very, very
Understand the purpose.
yeah.
needed. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
I tend to think that, you guys probably can't see this, but it's the,
Sheet.
it's that little bit of fence that's in front of the building. I don't know if you could highlight it for me, Steve.
I can zoom in on this section.
The diagonal one.
This diagonal
Diagonal
one.
bit. I tend to think that that'd be nice, that that's prominent. And that way, all the fence in front of the building on 31 would be the wrought iron. My opinion is that the fence that runs parallel to Meadow Lane, there's landscaping along Meadow Lane, and then that fence is sufficient, it's more than 100 feet from the edge of the roadway. And so I feel like it's sufficiently removed from the roadway to be considered prominent.
It'll be behind both landscaping and display, parking, some of the other things.
So, I mean, that's my opinion. I'd like to see that bit of fence in the front, in what I would call the front yard on 31.
So between
Be
this,
wrought
basically
iron.
from this building point
Yep.
on this diagonal, so on the 31 side, to make
I
that
feel
wrought
like that,
iron.
yes, I feel like that is prominent.
Okay.
In front of that, there's gonna be no parking. What's gonna happen?
What's here, yeah.
Is there-
That,
are there-
RVs will be there.
That's a display
RV,
area.
yep.
Okay.
RVs will be there.
There will be RVs in front too.
On the Meadow side,
No,
Oh.
will there be RVs between that diagonal fence he's talking about and US 31? What's gonna be in that area?
Yeah.
correct, RVs.
Yep.
So-
Outside of the fenced area?
No, they'll all be within the fenced area.
There's a fence that
I'm
goes
sorry.
along here. Here's the landscaping, here's the wrought iron fence as shown here.
But they're outside of the chain link fence.
Here's the chain link starting at
They're
this
contained
point.
within.
So there'll be, between the chain link and the wrought iron,
Mm-hmm.
there'll be RVs parked.
Correct.
So,
Kind of like where you see that hashed, those hashed lines, almost like diagonal
Right.
parking is probably how they're gonna be laid out there.
Mhm.
so,
It'll be 2 deep, actually, so basically a tunnel almost of RVs, kind of angled like that.
Okay.
so how prominent is the chain link gonna be with RVs parked in front of it?
Well, it's not. The RVs are gonna be between the chain link and the wrought iron.
Right.
So from 31, you're gonna see the chain link fence.
No,
You're gonna see the RVs.
the RV and the wrought iron,
We'll see it from Meadow Lane.
but that's way back in behind parking too.
You're gonna have US 31 chain, or wrought iron fence, then a bunch of RVs parked, and then the chain link.
I guess I understood the chain link to be the one that was closest to 31.
No, that
That's
is wrought iron.
That's
all
wrought
gonna
iron
be
there.
wrought iron.
Yep.
So I don't, which side of the chain link would you screen? The US 31 side or the Meadow Lane side? I'm kind of with Chris, if the landscape along Meadow Lane, if somebody's coming up Meadow Lane Village, there's landscaping there. And then, so I don't disagree that we need to screen the chain link on that diagonal, but I think that's about the only section of fence that needs to be screened.
Or just make it wrought iron, right? If
Could be
it's wrought
either
iron.
Oh, they want
screened
the
or
height,
as
the-
wrought iron, yep.
Yeah, so,
Mhm.
however we make that happen.
Okay.
Why don't we just have staff just take a look at that for him, so it's simple and.
It could either be screened, or if they propose to do wrought iron in just that section, that would
Yeah, or
take
more.
care of that as well.
Could they do wrought iron at 6 feet then? Could they, because as long as.
If you're
it's
out of
not-
the front yard at that point, yeah.
I mean, if you went with more wrought iron but raised it up, the 6 feet makes it more secure.
Yes.
Okay, so whether it's 6 foot of chain link or 6 foot of wrought iron, it's still gonna be more secure. So if they did that diagonal with 6 foot of wrought iron, they wouldn't have to screen it at all.
Let me show you what Action Water Sports, you probably have to do Google.
Oh, to get the street view of
Yeah.
it? Okay.
They kind of have like a modern
Yeah.
wrought iron just down the street from there. And again, it's just the part that's facing US 31. Yeah, it's like right, yeah.
Yeah, I gotta drop them.
Well, I think you can get actually onto their parking lot.
Oh, I think
Yeah.
I can zoom in.
If you just,
Oops. Okay, you can actually see it here too.
well,
Can I get it closer? Yeah.
yeah, pull, drop the pin closer onto the actual, yes. Actually, see that,
That
right
one.
there, there you
Okay,
go.
let's try this.
Okay, now
Can
zoom
I
back.
get over,
You should be able to zoom back.
there we go.
So you can kind of see
There's
there.
a wrought iron.
That's what they did there. And you can see the do not enter signs are like on some block posts that they have.
Oh, is that fence within, it's not within the road right away, right?
No, it's way back behind.
That's
the
behind the
Way back
building.
behind the
No.
building.
Why were they required to do wrought iron
They
then?
may
can
not
see
have
it
been
from the
required,
highway.
they might have just done it, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know if they
That's not
specific.
prominent.
We had to look real hard to see the picture.
Right.
I don't know how prominent I would call that, but,
Yeah.
but I think that's different than what I think where he's at is closer.
Yeah.
So if they do wrought iron across the front at 4 feet,
Mhm.
and then they put wrought iron, if they have a choice between either screening chain link
Mm-hmm,
or doing wrought iron at 6 feet for their own security,
Mhm.
I'm good with either one of those.
okay. Mm-hmm.
I don't know what's more preferred to you guys.
Yep, I'll run it by Jeff King, but I think the 6 foot of wrought iron makes the most sense.
Okay.
It can be more attractive and still give you the security you're looking for.
Yeah, because if you look on this site plan right there, so it looks like that's, Steve, I don't know if that's preserved, that looks like a sidewalk right there.
Right here? And then,
There, yeah,
and then a
and along the-
crosswalk connection
Yeah,
into
the
the building.
crosswalk, it's a crosswalk.
Yeah.
So if there were to be landscaping there, that would have to be adjusted to allow some type of a crosswalk there along with some strip in there to allow for plantings, if that were to be the case.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of tweaking, if any, needs to be done with the language of the conditions in the motion that's in the draft report?
I would say, so,
And then if you want to take a 5-minute recess while you think of some language, if we need to change it.
I think we can do it, just tweaking it real quick. So I would actually still keep number 3, so still no portion of the front yard, that still applies.
Yep.
And then portions of the proposed chain link fencing facing, I would say just the US 31 frontage shall include additional landscaping, or be replaced with, fencing of other appropriate material, or other material,
Just simply conforming to the ordinance, right?
conforming to the, other material conforming to the zoning ordinance, yeah. So I would say remove the and Meadow Lane drive, because we're agreeing that's less prominent behind, being further back behind a bunch of things. So the portions of the proposed chain link fencing facing the US 31 frontage shall include additional landscaping to provide enhanced screening per section 515B2B, or be replaced with alternate material in conformance with the zoning ordinance.
It still leaves them the option of which way they want to go.
Yeah.
Makes sense to me. Did everybody follow that?
So we're addressing our not met aspects of the staff review. That's basically specific to that Meadow Lane. The second driveway on Meadow Lane has to be eliminated, the one closest to US 31. That's the condition we're putting in there.
So,
Say that again, sorry.
Back one would be.
Back, the new one. The existing one stays.
We haven't talked about that yet.
So that's on the conditions.
Okay. But I mean, that,
Mm-hmm.
So the one
Move the second one,
closest
but
to
which one are you gonna
31
remove?
stays,
site
and the
plan have to
one,
reflect where the new one's gonna be.
It actually could be either. This happens to be the right existing one, but to have only one access onto Meadow Lane Drive.
So I have a question on that. If they don't, if they did not combine them sites, where was their second site, the flag, the
Oh, the flag lot?
L-shaped light? Where did they get access for that?
Yeah, where is?
Right now, if they sold that the back lot that has the odd configuration to it, where would that person access that?
That's a good question. I don't actually know.
Do they have a right of way coming across the furniture company?
They have access.
Somebody split that off, and I imagine somebody split that to at one time it was.
We didn't
equal
find
lots.
or did not receive any like easement in between these two, between Vandry and Bish's. We didn't see an easement between them.
Well, you can't have a landlocked parcel, so that flagpole lot must have access somewhere.
Well, maybe it wasn't landlocked. If somebody deeded that L-shaped parcel to the owner of what's now Bish's, it's not that landlocked, that L shape isn't landlocked, it's got access
Sure,
to
because it's
Meadow
the
Lane.
same owner, so like a
Same
back
owner,
door.
same-
Okay,
Right.
but if they sold it,
Yeah,
but couldn't
then
sell
that
it
might
then.
be an issue.
Yeah, we talked about this. It looks like most likely when Vandry was created, since that's the newer parcel, was probably split off of that larger parcel. It's most likely what happened.
There's nothing saying that they had a right of way to 31 as of right now. The Bish's property does not have a right of way to 31 through Vandry's lot that you know of.
As far as we know of, we didn't see anything to that effect.
Yeah, and the way that drive is constructed is for fire access
Mm-hmm.
for Vandry on the north side with the turnaround in the rear for fire trucks.
We don't, if that helps, yeah.
Okay.
There's no way out right there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I know Jeff had told me that would be the other point tonight, would be the second entrance, one farther away from 31.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, we were advised by fire
Mm-hmm.
department that we needed that because we needed 2 points basically for either traffic or fire.
Okay. In thinking back to some other sites that we've seen, site plans that have come in, I think if there were any second access points at all, they've been like emergency only, they've been gated. But I think that's only been in a couple instances. This is, I believe, the first time we've actually had a specific request for additional access. This is the first time we've evaluated this on this set of standards, had this specific type of request. But I'm thinking some of those other prominent sites we've reviewed have.
Well, the village of Garfield that we just dealt with an
Yeah.
hour ago, that's only got one access.
That's got one.
off of Garfield. The
Mhm.
fire department's okay
How
with
many
that.
access-
That's a bunch of apartments, so
Mhm.
I can't imagine the fire department is somehow gonna drive this train differently.
how many access points does Action Water Sports have?
They have.
Well, they have that access road, that Olson Road so they have the whole front thing, or
Yeah.
what do you call that, Olson's Commerce
But
Drive.
really only one access point, right?
Yeah, one access point.
Kind of one large access to it.
They're a lot
No, it's a
smaller.
small
That's
one,
what,
yeah.
I didn't have that big a problem with the second access coming off Meadow Lane because it's a small road right next to it, McAllister. They got 2 or 3 accesses off Meadow Lane. You know.
This all kind of, I'm not sure when this was, if it was in when the ordinance was done in 2015, but there was a pretty serious amendment to the ordinance regarding access management. And that's what's kicking in right now on this one drive portion. So there are a lot of non-conforming situations throughout the township regarding that.
But as of now, if I read your report correctly, you're saying that it doesn't meet the threshold for getting a second access on Meadow Lane as far as
Mhm.
staff is concerned.
Correct. Yep.
Would the applicant, I guess you would, if you're only allowed one, would you maintain the one that's the recognized one right next to US 31, or would you abandon both those and create a new, maybe bigger access point?
I don't think we would be able to create a new, bigger one, no.
Stay with
Maintain
the one
the
that's
one.
We would
there.
maintain the one and.
Okay.
I mean, so what would, let's say, we pave around it, but we leave that as a dirt egress on the second part of it. Because currently there is technically two exit points. We use both of them. One is just dirt and one is paved. What constitutes that as a difference? I just for my clarity.
Right. So in looking back at previous site plan approvals or any permits, at least what we've found is there wasn't a site plan that actually had a second access on it. It just sort of appeared over time.
Yes.
And there was no permit specifically for it.
Got you.
Yeah, so that's what happened, at least to the best of our knowledge, with that.
So Steve, regarding your not met concerns,
Yeah.
most of them relate to the second drive onto Meadow Lane.
Right,
But
so
I
there's,
noted
yeah. Go ahead.
One of
yeah.
them addresses cross-access easements. Is there, should we have a condition in the approval that addresses the need to provide cross-access easements?
Well, if
Oh.
if there's not a second access, there doesn't
Don't
need to
have to
be
worry about it.
the cross-access easement.
There's two motions. One's for the second driveway and one's for the fencing.
Motions. So we're denying, I see that, we're denying, and then we're making the motion to approve, but then with the conditions. And so then, when you're saying it's not met regarding cross-access easements,
That is based on the standards for, so this is according to 512-3A, the qualifying standards for additional access are these four things. And so one of the standards to qualify for additional access is cross-access easements are provided. So since they are not providing it, it further emphasizes that they don't qualify.
I was just confused. in
That's
reading
okay,
it.
yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So if we were to meet all four of those, would we then be okay to do the second?
If you were, however, there's four of them, and yeah, so that's one of
Yeah,
them, but
yeah.
the first two, yeah, I think, because there's, so the four of them are, the request is not a result of a self-created issue by current or previous ownership, including or previous ownership. So seeing that this appeared, to the best of our knowledge, and was never approved, I would say that would be a self-created issue by previous ownership. And the request is not contrary to a previously approved plan or project that limited access. To the best of our knowledge, we're seeing just the one access was the only one actually approved.
Got you.
So I think it would be difficult, and I'm not seeing anything, any information that would change those first two.
Gotcha.
Yep.
I know our biggest issue with it too is, I totally understand with the apartment complex, that the one we did beforehand, it had one, and that was fine on that. With us doing, RVs, we have very often large 45-foot
Yeah.
RVs coming in the one small entrance point. It's very hard to turn those around in a small parking lot, especially when we're busy. So being able to pull in and out causes a lot less lot damage, a lot less things. But the other thing, this actually happened at the lot I used to work at in Boise. We actually had the RV break down as it was pulling in, and it blocked the exit point. So that those two things are kind of our fears on that, and why having the second would greatly.
Yeah, I understand, yeah.
Are they limited to a 25-foot width?
I don't know specifically. That is a good question. We could check, but yeah.
It might help if they could have a wider,
Yeah.
given the size of vehicles that are coming in and out.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I'm noting that the radiuses provided here are only 20-foot radiuses.
Mm-hmm.
Does your engineer run turning movements with those large trailers to see whether or not you have something
Yeah.
to think about.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. We can double check it, but,
Well, I'm ready to make a motion.
Yeah, it seems like we sort of are, to some extent, a little sympathetic with your request for a second, and I understand your reasoning, but under the standards that we've got to comply with, it doesn't it doesn't meet those standards to give a second access at this point, but.
Absolutely.
But it sounds like maybe there's ways you can widen or re-engineer the entrance that you've got, and certainly no opposition at this end to doing anything like that.
Well, the reason I brought up relocating is if you look at the site plan with the fence is right at that driveway that they're, the legally recognized driveway. If you really look at it, they're gonna be coming in right next to that new 6-foot wrought iron fence. So my question would be, all right, if we approve this site plan and they decide, hey, we want to relocate that driveway and make it wider and safer to get big rigs in and out, if we only get one, can they do that, or do we have to bring it back to us again? Can we make that a condition that they have the ability to relocate their existing driveway and make it bigger?
I'm wondering, Joe, if it doesn't actually become just a staff, goes back to a staff review.
Right.
Once we've
Yeah.
rejected, as a planning commission, 2 entrances, then changes in the site are probably, am I correct? That becomes a staff review?
Yeah, and actually, the whole site plan review was forwarded. If they had not requested a second access, this would have just been reviewed administratively. So, yeah, if they do change that, if they want to move it,
That's something you guys can deal with.
that's
Okay.
something us, or Mike Green, zoning administrator, yeah, we can handle that internally.
But we're looking at the fencing, and I'm looking where that existing driveway is. I
Yeah.
think that would be really hamper the movement coming in and out. That's why I'm suggesting.
They'll probably need to amend that. Chris, did you want to make a motion?
Yeah, I'll make the motion. I'll bogart all the motions tonight, at least so far. Motion that the request for additional access to Meadow Lane Drive as described in application SPR 2023-08, submitted by Taylor Eschbach and of Kimley Horn of Michigan Inc., be denied, be denied based on a review. I'm not used to saying denied, sorry for that editorial. But be denied based on a review of the request against the requirements of section 512.1A of the Garfield Township zoning ordinance as described in Planning Department Report 2023-96.
Support.
Is there any further discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries.
And I'll make another motion that application SPR 2023-08 submitted by Taylor Eschbach of Kimley Horn of Michigan Inc. for a vehicle dealership with outdoor sales on parcel 05-032-002-10 and parcel 05-032-002-15 and located at 705 North US 31 South be approved, subject to the following conditions 1 through 9 as listed in the Planning Department Report 2023-96.
And as amended?
As amended
As
tonight.
amended.
As
Amended
amended.
number 4,
The
yeah.
language added to number 4.
Thank you. As amended.
Support.
Joe, you supported that? Joe McManus? Okay. Is there further discussion on that motion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. So you got the permit, and then it sounds like if you need to tweak the driveway or whatever, that's probably something you can deal with staff. You're gonna get one driveway, but staff will be
We'll
happy
make
to
it
work
work.
with you.
Yep,
Thank you all so much, I really
thank you,
appreciate it.
yep. we'll be
Have a
in touch.
wonderful night.
Thank you.
So how do they have a US 31 address when they enter on Meadow Lane?
Address can be kind of wherever, I think you probably have frontage, depending on access can be different places.
How far does that Olson Road go down? Does it go all the way to their property line?
It goes only into, let's see
It
here,
doesn't hit Bandry. It
Right.
stops right
Oh,
there.
it stops there.
right.
Because it's,
Action
It's
is
deceptive, the label actually is cutting off, there's where it actually stops, because there's, as you mentioned last time, there's a grade difference right there.
well, and the Vandry is designed as a parking lot where that's kind of like a frontage road there. So there's the frontage road and then parking would have to be separate from that.
as much as we've pushed cross access, if they came through and said, hey, we want to push Olson Commerce Drive all the way through to Meadow Lane Village to eliminate a lot of, traffic on US 31. Would we consider that, or would we say, well, we can't let them do cross access because now they have a second entrance?
I think long-term, looking at that, although, like, just the fact that it goes to Vandry's site specifically, and both with the grade and that there's an existing development there. If there's another way to connect to this whole system through another way, maybe behind these sites at that point. That could be something to look at. From my understanding, the Olson Commerce, when that was put in, all of that was just Olson's site, and so it was before you start subdividing this and creating those lots that you've got the frontage road at least on that section of it. But yeah, ideally, if we could extend that further,
But
if there's opportunities, but.
Our ordinance, the way we read, wouldn't allow to be able to do that.
No, it would. It would consider that cross-access as a cross-access
Yeah, frontage roads can be
easement.
part of cross-access.
Yeah, it wouldn't consider it like a separate road entrance.
Okay.
Yeah.
It seems contradicting to me. but-
Well, it's, because it's a private road situation where it's not necessarily functioning as like an actual road.
Ideally, it'd be great if you
drive.
could
It's like an
get
internal
rid of all
drive.
those businesses
It would be.
on an
Yeah.
access road versus accessing 31. Because if you want to go from, hey, you just bought a RV and you want to hit Kentucky Fried Chicken before you hit the road, now you got to go on 31 and go down to Kentucky Fried Chicken. Well, you could just take that access road down there, so.
Yeah, I
Right.
agree.
It would be
Anyway,
nice.
okay.
Yeah, and I believe it does actually say, intent of this section is to provide safe and efficient travel along public roadways. So it's limiting the access to public roadways. With Olson Commerce being private, that is providing your kind of buffer between that and having the limited access onto the public roads. And Meadow Lane happens to be public at that point, so that's why this kicked in on that standard as well. Mm-hmm.
Anything else people want to talk to staff about on this one, or are we ready to move on to some new business? I don't want to rush anybody, but,
We'll beat that one to death.
624.
all right, we'll move on to new business. First up is item 7A, Planning Department Report 2023-97, an introduction about a proposed Durga R3 rezoning.
Yep. Zooming into that site. So this is a application for rezoning of a piece of property at 2624 Hartman. As you can see on the screen, this is the site here. It's immediately west of TCAP's Sabin Data Center. It's immediately south of a portion of Miller Creek Nature Reserve, our parkland. And access off of Hartman, just a little bit west of Cass. So looking at some of the background data on this, our future land use actually does show this as high-density residential. It shows a lot of the north side of Hartman, which does have high-density residential, including Live Arbors, sort of immediately west of here, and Chelsea Park further down the road. Sort of matches that. The back kind of northwest corner, it's shown actually as recreational. Looking into how that was designated, that we believe it was using sort of the wetland data and GIS layer to sort of show there's certain other areas on the future land use that are listed as like ag rural land or recreational, but they're following like streams and wetlands more as like a preservation. The existence of wetlands, no matter what the zoning is back there, would preclude developing that portion anyway, so no matter what it is. And but otherwise, that whole front portion is all designated as high-density residential. So there's just some background on the site itself and kind of what's around it, but otherwise, the only thing is a motion to set it for a public hearing.
What is the current use or future, if you know about it, of the property immediately to the west that you say is owned by the road commission?
Yeah, so it is owned by Road Commission. I don't know specifically. We did just send an email alerting them that application is sent out there. So I don't know if they chose to rezone theirs as well, to have almost the same analysis, because it's kind of the same situation. I don't know if they just need like the frontage for a future widening of Hartman, or what their kind of interest. We didn't get a lot of detail, but if we get a chance to follow up specifically, we might get to know more.
Yeah, we probably don't need to know it as far as setting a hearing, but
Right.
conceivably, if we talk about a rezoning, we got to think about the zoning of what's literally right next door to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it might be interesting to know what is going on there.
Well, there's that parcel, there's also a smaller one to the east of there on Hartman that's also owned by the road commission. There's also Grand Traverse County owns a strip that's kind of at the end of Hartman. And those were all acquired as part of, the crossing there of the Hartman-Hammond Bridge. So they were, I think, when those were made available, they obviously purchased the entire parcel. Whether they would actually use it as part of that Hartman-Hammond crossing and eventual connection to 31, probably not likely, but they at least acquired it. It gives them, because obviously if they're going to have that crossing, Hartman is going to be improved upon, and they need, the space, and there'll probably be some other property acquisitions that will occur. So I think they were just thinking in the future it would be better to have those in their possession.
So a question for that is, if this got rezoned and it got built, if they came in to get a permit, if they got their county road commission permit for the new road and they were doing apartments or something like that with high density, at that point, would the road commission ask for more frontage before they would allow them to, would they consider that, or would they be asking for more frontage?
I mean, I think it would behoove anyone who is interested in this parcel to check with road commission on what their future plans are before starting to develop it. I mean, because we would look at just reviewing an application that came to us if one came to us, and in this case, it's just the application for the rezoning. But
anyway,
road commission's going to have their own objectives as well. So,
but as far as you know, right now, they're not trying to gain any more right of way at this point on a new build. You think they would stay with your same setbacks there?
we haven't heard specifically, so I think that'll come
Well,
down to when they
they're
engineer
working
that
on
road, yeah.
Yeah, they're working on the connection right now of not just the crossing, but also to 31. And it's our understanding that they should have that identified by the end of this year.
But there's no zoning or county, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's nothing that says a speculative bridge or speculative road
Well,
subjects the rezoning of a parcel or the development of a parcel. The only thing that I see as an outcome is that potentially our rezoning of it or somebody building on it increases the value of the property should the county road commission ever decide that they need to exercise their government right to take the land. Eminent domain for a bridge or infrastructure, it's just, this is just increasing the value of it that they'll have to pay more, but we can't even consider that in our zoning assessment or rezone.
I think you're right about that, Chris. But what might be interesting is to know what is planned for that property immediately west of this, because in any rezoning request, we've got to look at the implications to the immediate neighbors. And somebody's an immediate neighbor that's got the current RR zoning. Of course, at a public hearing, we'll find out if they have things to say, and maybe they will, maybe they won't. So, yeah, we don't need to get into that detail now, but at some point, it may be important to know what the owner of that property's opinion is.
And they should come to us and tell us. so
They're
we
gonna
don't
be
have to go
given
to them.
notification, they're within 300 feet, right? So they're gonna get notification,
They're-
have an opportunity to weigh in.
they sit on two sides, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
The master plan also has both of those parcels in that R3,
Mhm.
right? So,
To me, it seems like there would be an opportunity if somebody were to acquire this property for multifamily and maybe broker some deal with the road commission to say,
Frontage.
you get the frontage and we'll get the back end, so we'll do
Yeah,
the
let
development.
us
'Cause
build along
I
the
don't
wetland.
see, if Hartman Hammond, if the crossing goes forward and it goes out to 31, most of that is gonna be on the south side of Hartman, only because of the considerable amount of construction in the multifamily and condos that have been done on the north side. It seems like the more path of least resistance is gonna be on the parcels to the south side of Hartman. But, so I don't see them going that far north, particularly getting closer to the wetland area. So it could be a win-win where there could be a sufficient amount of land dedicated for potentially a future right-of-way, along with the back end that could be done as multifamily.
But you've got enough information as far as staff's concerned to move this along and schedule it.
Mhm. Yeah, at this point, we received the application that we have from the property owner. When we did email or correspond with road commission, they didn't give any indication on like the future plans for the road, but also just didn't give any indication like to rezone their own piece of property. So we're considering what's in front of
Got it.
us, so, yeah.
Are we comfortable scheduling this for a public hearing in a month?
Sure, I'll make the motion that application Z 2023-02 be scheduled for public hearing for the September 13th, 2023 Planning Commission regular meeting.
Support. Is there any further discussion on that motion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Next, under new business, item 7B, Planning Department Report 2023-98, an introduction about a possible special use permit for a portable storage solutions. John or Steve gonna talk us through this
Yeah,
one?
I'm going to cover this one. We received an application for special use permit for the location is 2550 Cass Road, north of Miller Creek Drive. This is a former, most people would know this as a former Pepsi building. This is a special use permit for retail industrial primary on the site, which is a use permitted by special use permit. It's for the storage and sales of shipping containers. And so there was some concerns about this use being established earlier this year. So there was some violation notices that were issued, and the special use permit is really intended to correct the establishment of the use on that site and to meet the requirements. Because there's really no changes on the site, there isn't a significant amount of changes that are going to be in terms of pavement and so forth. It's mostly the use of it from a retail industrial primary use, and that there's also outdoor storage on the site. So most of the requirements that are addressed in the report are related to outdoor storage. I got some site pictures in there in the report, but there's some screening that's required and screening material that we've suggested in there. So there is some existing chain link. We're just suggesting that there be some vegetative screening on that portion that's facing Cass Road. The site itself, to the south, there's a creek that runs in that area, so there's a lot of vegetation. The back end of the site butts up to MDOT rail. And then the north side is actually a shared fence, and it's probably the fence primarily for the self-storage unit place, which actually runs the full length of the north parcel line all the way out to Cass, and then that chain link runs along the frontage of that self-storage place to the north. So really just the screening, we're requesting the screening on the frontage that faces Cass Road. There's some other very minor items as well on there related to let's see what else we got on here. Restriping of the parking spaces, bicycle parking, noting that there's no changes to the existing lighting, still need some dumpster details and snow storage. But other than that, it looks like it's in fairly good shape to go forward with scheduling a public hearing based on our recommendation.
Anybody got specific questions, or should we get this for a public hearing? Molly?
On the south side of that property, there's a lot of vegetation. Will that be remaining?
Yes, and we can make, I'm assuming that's going to remain, so we can make sure that there's some notation to that effect.
It's probably within the creek
Yeah, there's,
setback, so the creek runs,
Yeah,
basically where that blue line is the creek, so I doubt they can disturb that within a
50
certain number of feet of
or-
that.
Yeah.
we'll just make sure that's noted on the plan.
Motion?
If anybody has other things they want to talk about, we should hear it. Otherwise, we certainly could take a motion now, Pat.
Motion application SUP-2023-06 submitted by Northview 22 LLC for a special use permit for a retail industrial primary use at parcel 05022-027-15 be accepted and scheduled for public hearing for the September 13th, 2023 regular Planning Commission meeting, subject to the following additional information being provided by the applicant. Items number 1 through 7 as indicated in Planning Department Report 2023-98.
Support.
Any further discussion on that motion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Have a public hearing and see you next month. John, one question I would ask that you maybe provide us with some information.
Sure.
In time for that hearing. It mentions, as far as landscaping goes, I'm wondering, the east side of this is the railroad. And I don't think any of us are thinking you need any landscaping where there's a railroad. In the event the railroad goes away, what are the uses that are east of the railroad that would be then maybe or maybe not looking at this?
Okay.
So if you could just fill us in, in a next report, what those are.
Sure.
It may not have any bearing on anything, but I'd kind of like to know what it is.
What if the railroad got turned into a walk path?
Yeah,
Would you want-
those are all possibilities, but, yeah, we can talk about those things when we have our hearing, I
It
guess.
doesn't affect,
Well, you want to landscape that.
But we could talk about that again in a month. It doesn't have anything to do with whether or not we have a hearing. We've got our hearing, it's just a piece of factual information. Anybody got anything else on this one? If not, moving along, item 7C is Planning Department Report 2023-99, the Cherryland Center Planned Shopping Center Sign Review. John or Steve gonna,
Yeah, I got that one as well. So we received a sign application. This is, the application is for the, sheets here. So you recall approving a site plan on the site for where there's the outlot for the Cherryland Center. I thought I had it here. Right, so there's the, for the outlot that was being proposed, it is an outlot from the Cherryland Center, was going to be a multi-unit commercial building, and they've now since made a request for a sign. Well, one of the things that we've expressed to them is that the signs needed for the Cherryland Center are supposed to be done in a coordinated manner, because there aren't, and this is only pertaining to freestanding signs. Wall signs are permitted on each individual shop or store location, but the freestanding is limited to the development as a whole. So similar to like the Grand Traverse Mall, there's only a couple freestanding signs. There's one on South Airport and there's one on 31. This is similar to the same situation, and we've dealt with this similar application when Wendy's came in and wanted a freestanding sign as well. The applicant did reach out to, at least from what they've stated to us, we haven't seen any actual backup information pertaining to that, but did indicate that they reached out to the individual business property owners within the Cherryland Center to see if they wanted to be participating in the freestanding sign. Our concern in dealing with the Cherryland Center is a little bit tricky because it is being fractured into multiple ownership and different uses. It's no longer managed as a one contiguous type of site location. So we are still trying to kind of manage it in the form that it was originally approved in as a planned shopping center, even though it tends to operate less and less like that. We've had some conversations with some of the property owners in there. Our goal is, the last time that there was a comprehensive development plan, so essentially a site plan for the entire development, was back in the late 90s when it went from an interior mall to a strip center. We haven't had any updates to that, and there's a concern about some of the way that this is going to be continuously redeveloped. We did permit the 2 outlots, the one that did develop for the Wendy's and then the subsequent one that allows for commercial. But there does need to be that updated site development plan, which would include a sign plan, but also addresses common issues like parking. Access is a really important issue. There is a cross-access easement in place, but it doesn't pertain to all of the parcels in the planned shopping center. So there are technically some of those, for instance, even like the newer ones, like the coffee shops and the Wendy's that, well, I mean, see, not the Wendy's, but definitely the coffee shops that may not have legal access out onto the roadways, even though there's that easement agreement in place. But it all comes back to that we feel that in order for there to be any more changes to the site, particularly when it relates to of those common things, stormwater, signage, access, parking, and so forth, we'd like to see an updated comprehensive development plan, which can be required by the Planning Commission for anything in the planned shopping center district, which is what Cherryland Center is. So that's why our hesitancy in terms of this freestanding sign request. We believe there can be an opportunity for signage. There is, based on the zoning, there would be a permitted freestanding sign, 2 of them on Garfield and 2 of them on South Airport. One could be a pole sign, the others could be a monument sign. But we're trying to, again, get that site development plan updated. That's where it could have a cohesive sign plan that would recognize all the various property owners. And to be quite honestly, just as when Wendy's came in, they do have a lot of visibility from Garfield. I don't think they're building, not only Garfield, but the building is visible from South Airport as well. Our concern is that the signage also to be addressed to get some of the interior businesses that may not have as greater visibility. That's why it still needs to be treated as this kind of planned shopping center. There's also the same intent when we have in other districts as well, where we kind of have these shopping centers in the CL, the CG, and CH, which have kind of combined development signs as well. So where they're multi-tenant. And we want to make sure that there's been, that clearly that it's been defined as that that the business owners have been approached, or at least that they are either part of the sign plan or decided not to. Don't have any backup material for that. It probably at this point would be best served as to be part of a sign plan as part of a comprehensive development plan.
I have a question for you. Who would you request do this comprehensive development plan with as many owners as there are? Is there an association or some, I mean, who would you do it? You go back to Kumar and ask him to do it? You want to go to?
We've talked to representatives, at least from the 3 larger property owners of the actual, the original mall. You know, one of the things that they are bound by is a reciprocal easement agreement that was set up when it was Showstacks Mall and Sears. Now, they inherited that, but there is some provisions in there that, quite honestly, are, now, it doesn't pertain to us because it's not a township document, it's a private agreement. But there are things in there, for instance, like the only uses that can be going in there are commercial uses. Well, we have some non-commercial or non-retail uses in there now. So it's incumbent on them to update that agreement. So that's one important thing that needs to change. Also, we've expressed to them is this ability to do additional signage, freestanding signs out there. That's another reason to. There's also some challenges there if they want to do any additional development. This last outlot is about all that we want to receive, unless it's an application into an existing building. But we don't want any new buildings or new parcels going in because it's just getting to this point where it's getting fragmented. So they stand to benefit from going through the process. I believe those, at least the property owners that we've spoke with, see the value of that. It's really incumbent on them to coordinate. In the case of both the curling center and the go-kart facility that wants to go in, or that was approved for the Sears, they did utilize Gosling Zubek as an engineer, so they've done already a lot of work. They've done, part of that was evaluation of not only the parking lot, but the stormwater system, which they all share. And actually, Kumar, with the exception of some of those, like the Burger King that did underground stormwater, everything flows up to Kumar's property up in the corner of the northwest part of the site. So it's really incumbent on them all to work together. We're trying to be flexible and understanding that with redevelopment, there needs to be the flexibility to allow that investment to occur. But we're also kind of holding the line at this point where we've seen enough changes there. We need to have that updated comprehensive development plan.
It would make our life a lot easier.
Yes.
And it would benefit them.
And them, yeah.
And truly allow, because we anticipate that there could be some additional use of some of the underutilized areas in here, but that plan is incumbent to ensure that we don't run into problems.
Well, yeah, if we were to approve a sign, we could be inadvertently entitling some owners over other owners without that comprehensive plan, which is why it's required.
That they need to all be party to. Yeah.
Is there, I concur with your desire and wish for this updated comprehensive development plan. It sounds like probably all the owners need to play ball to make that happen. What if one of these several owners doesn't play ball? Does that one get to hold hostage everybody else, and anything they want to do to make a tweak, we're saying, no, you can't do it because we want an updated comprehensive development plan?
That's a good question. I don't know if I have the answer for that.
Is that a potential risk? I mean, if there's legitimate needs on behalf of some of these folks, maybe for some signage, I totally agree with Chris. We're not gonna just start willy-nilly doing that. But what if one owner, hypothetically, doesn't really give a rip about signage and doesn't feel like spending the money on an updated comprehensive development plan? Can they just sticking their head in the sand negatively impact all the other owners?
It could, but there are other aspects of it that they're tied. The parking is a key one. As you can see, the configuration of the lot lines there is there's no real rational way to which they go. So actually, if you look at that in the packet there, I have an ownership map.
Yep.
So I don't know. It's a very interesting configuration. So that the parking is another big issue. The stormwater drainage is a substantial one. It's odd in some cases, for instance, like the Sears property doesn't necessarily have physically direct access to any road, but does have an easement agreement in place. So there's different components in it. I would hate to have to go down the part of trying to deconstruct this thing. Unfortunately, they're all kind of married in this kind of, misshapen format, but I think it can work. But if one were to hold them hostage, that's why we're trying to, at this point, no longer allow for any additional new buildings on this particular site until we get an updated.
Or new parcels. Yeah.
Or new parcels as well.
If they came forward with a comprehensive sign plan that all of the owners bought into, could they circumvent the updated comprehensive plan?
Well, in the ordinance, the sign plan would be a part of the comprehensive development plan.
And it
In
couldn't-
Article
could
9,
not
we
be
have a list
separated.
of the components of what's required in a comprehensive development plan, and that's where the sign plan should be as part of that. At least we believe that's what
Couldn't be separated,
Yeah.
like that, because that,
Just-
yeah.
You have a sign plan, you have a landscaping plan, you have, stormwater plan, et cetera. All those are components of that comprehensive development plan.
Structurally, if you want this sign, you have to do all these other things under our ordinance, and it's warranted because it's such a mess, like you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
And some of it could just be updating, because there is that reciprocal easement that is in place, but just more updating to connect it to actually an updated kind of master drawing of the whole site, but that just covers those four main areas: shared parking, shared stormwater, shared signage, and shared access. So like the access actually works really well, the fact that they are tied together, because even all these new site plans we reviewed, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 recently, we've added no new curb cuts, which has been fantastic. So making sure that the access easements maintain in place, parking easements for whoever is participating in each one of those. But and then the signage could be potentially, as part of that, you have like a master sign plan on where the signs are and how big they are and what they are. But in terms of what the actual content of them, like if they switch in and out from time to time, then that just becomes, okay, as long as the main sign structure is not changing, whoever is on it is just an internal agreement and then just getting the right permits administratively. But it sort of sets it in place at that point.
If I heard you correctly, the owners with whom you've spoken so far seem on board with the idea, suggestion from staff that there ought to be this updated development
Correct.
plan. Are there still more owners that you haven't yet had a chance to visit with?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't know if it's our responsibility to organize that effort to develop a comprehensive development plan for this site. I think we've made it pretty clear, and here's another instance where we're pushing back a little bit because it is something that we want to see happen. So I don't know if it's necessarily the township's responsibility to do that. I mean, we are certainly working with the property owners and facilitating, this kind of reworking of the Cherryland Center, but it's also incumbent on themselves to kind of work together.
Okay.
So,
Well, it's not the first time, and probably won't be the last that we're gonna deny a sign request, and I think you're right about the plan, but at that point, it's not really our responsibility to push that, so, I don't know what we do.
and to be quite honest, we have other examples. So if you look at the Grand Traverse Mall, there's only 2 freestanding signs there. And in that case, obviously Brookfield is a manager and they have relationships with Target and Macy's and so forth, even though those are separate owners. They do have it where they are able to combine it. It might have the old sign there. I don't know if it's got.
Depending on how old this December of
Images.
2020 might be the older sign.
Yeah.
So at this
Yeah.
time, it was just saying Grand Traverse Mall, but if you drive by now, they've replaced that with some of the tenants.
There's about 9 or 10, 10, some of their larger ones that are in there that have been able to put in their logos and so forth. So they were able to combine them. Also, if you look in terms of outlots, if you're drive by where Starbucks is at and the Sally Beauty Supply and the T-Mobile, you'll see that they have clear visibility, yet they have no freestanding signs.
It's all wall signage.
It's all wall signage, yet people are able to find the Starbucks. And I think people, in the case of Cherryland, they can still find, Big B Coffee and 7 Brew, which just opened up, and Wendy's seems to be doing fairly well. Burger King, which never had a freestanding sign at the corner there. Obviously, corner is helpful, but visibility, but they've been able to flourish. And quite honestly, even though it's not a planned shopping center, if you go across the street at the crossing there, across from the mall, people are still able to find Home Depot and Walmart. And when you drive along South Airport, you see a lot of lush landscaping, and you don't see any freestanding signs. So the idea of that you have to have a freestanding sign in order for a business to survive in this day and age, I don't think is quite the same as it was, thanks to modern technology and having phones and so forth. People are able to find where they're going. So it seems to be that it works out fairly well.
Sounds like maybe it makes sense to, as the draft motion suggests, deny the sign request, and that's the end of that for now. If the people who want the sign and aren't given a sign, bring forth some new information about we've tried and we're beating our heads against the wall. We can't get anybody to cooperate with this comprehensive redevelopment plan. There'll be a new piece of information and we'll have to factor all that in and figure out now what.
Yeah, I mean, there could be the deconstruction of the shopping center, which could quite honestly be a real nightmare.
Yeah.
Particularly in some of these ones that's questionable whether they have, like, some of the smaller lots might have a lot of visibility, but technically, I don't think they have the rights to the access. They're relying on the other property owners to provide them access. Essentially, the owner of the Kmart, the curling, which is the curling club, Kumar, which owns Yonkers and Big Lots, and,
Dr. Walls.
well, but not even that one. I think those two owners pretty much provide all the access to the site. Nobody else, so we really only have two property owners that provide all the access to the site. So it's imperative to have everybody kind of work together, with the exception of Burger King. Burger King has that right in, right out, so they do have their sole way of getting in and out of their site. But it's limited.
Other thoughts, or anybody care to make a motion?
I'll make a motion, the application SPR 2022-22-A submitted by Traverse City Retail Management 6 LLC for sign permit for a freestanding sign at Cherryland Center be denied, as freestanding signs for individual businesses in Cherryland Center shopping center development are not permitted in accordance with the zoning ordinance.
Support.
Any further discussion on that motion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Man, that's 2 denials in one night. I mean,
Yeah.
it's unusual for us.
Next up on the agenda is public comment. Does anybody from the public want to make any comments to us?
Public is shaking their head no.
The public says no, so we won't have any more public comment.
Thank you for attending.
Yeah, moving along, however, we've got a couple items of other business. First is item 9A, Planning Department Report 2023-100, a withdrawal of an application that pertained to 3566 North US 31 South.
Glad I zoomed in on this because this actually impacts both of our other business items. But we'll start with 3566, which is the one in the middle. This was brought to us last year and was approved as a multi-tenant commercial. They were going to put some restaurants, drive-through. I believe their application showed some renderings with Chipotle as one of the tenant spaces, although this was the commercial like real estate. They just were in charge of, they would be in charge of the tenant spaces. Following, like, any site plan review or development review, there's always the conditions of approval in most cases that staff follows up. In many cases, that's dotting the i's, crossing the t's before it goes on to permitting. We were sort of waiting and waiting to get a lot, kind of checking in with them to get the last things in, get some things recorded. And that ultimately never happened. And then we did get information from them, and there's actually a couple letters in there. One of them indicating that they are no longer moving forward with this project. It sounds like there's a disagreement between them and the property owner, and they weren't able to come to terms, so they are no longer pursuing this and provided a request to withdraw this application.
So this is pretty much just pro forma that we're accepting that withdrawal.
To accept that happened, yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioners have any questions for staff on that, or if so, let's hear them. If not, we should have a motion.
I'll make the motion that withdrawal of the plan application SPR 2022-05 by Garfield Retail Management LLC, RL Rig USA Acquisition LLC for 3566 North US 31 South be accepted.
Support.
Any further discussion on that motion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next item is item 9B, and staff wants to talk to us about the Kids Creek US 31 buffer. I don't think there's anything in our packet on that, but we're gonna
Yeah, this
hear
is
some
just,
things right now.
this is more for information because this is something you may see or hear about. So Steve, if you could just zoom out so we can see.
Yeah.
So you're kind of looking at where, I just want to kind of show that length of the Kids Creek buffer, which is basically, it comes onto the east side of 31, right there by where Fox Motors is. We approved a site plan for them to do the truck repair facility there. And then it follows the north along there in front of McDonald's and so forth, goes all the way up to Big Boy, and then it crosses back under 31 and goes up and merges with the other branch there in front of Meyer. So this is a creek that is, so in our ordinance, we have a vegetative buffer requirement of 35 feet on each side of the creek. And as part of the site plans that have gone through there, we've identified that buffer, natural vegetative buffer, has to be maintained. And it's worked out fairly well in most cases. If you recall, when the MSU Credit Union went in there, we took out one of the driveways, and I think that's probably a really good example of how it's really developed. It looks really natural out there, and the importance of that vegetative buffer is not necessarily aesthetic, but it's for the quality of Kids Creek. And if you've probably heard a lot about the efforts by the community to improve the quality of the water in Kids Creek. Meyer, when they did their project, did some stormwater management parts of their parking lot to reduce the impact of their stormwater runoff onto Kids Creek. There was the big project over there by Munson Hospital, by the Cancer Center, which restored some of that area as well. So we're, one of the parts here is we recognize it's a bit of a challenge when we have a very active commercial area that's along a very busy highway that also serves as kind of a street to access all these stores and businesses. But unfortunately, we've had some problems lately, just as we had the Nicolay Bank where they did some clear cutting just recently in front of the Fox Motors truck repair facility. We had some clear cutting that happened here within the last several days. Steve was just out today taking some photos so you can kind of see what happened there. So you can kind of see in that last picture to the left what the actual vegetation looked like in terms of its height. And this is down in the lower area, so you can see the retaining wall in the back. That it was kind of the old Bill Marsh dealership and so forth. And not only was it cleared out, but there's also, I don't see any effort to kind of plant anything there. Maybe there will be or something, but so there's a lot of dirt there, which contributes to erosion and also has the potential to damage the quality of the water in the creek and so forth, as well as the flow of the creek. So that one we were aware of, and we had a meeting just the other day, or actually yesterday, with the Watershed Center. We met with the Conservation District, because as much as that's a violation of the zoning ordinance, we also do want to restore that area. So we thought, teaming up with the Conservation District, they'll be able to provide some expertise to the property managers and property owners to kind of restore that area back to where it should be in terms of that vegetative buffer. So we just also found out today, looking right a couple doors up, so you do have that vacant lot that we were just looking at regarding the withdrawal. But now in front of the well now, we've also had some clear cutting as well that it's occurred. So that's
Well now.
yeah, that's in front of well now. Which was a long-standing vegetative area that was cleared out. So that's another one we just became aware of. So we're now in an effort to try to not just go through the violation letter process that we typically do with the zoning administrator, but also to alert the other property owners along that corridor there to say, look, this vegetative buffer there is important to the quality of the creek, which is water quality is a very important priority for this community. We want your cooperation. Please do not remove that vegetation. So we will be, we realize this has been a challenge along this creek here, so we're, at least this portion, so we're gonna start doing more of a comprehensive approach. We are looking at different ideas. There's gonna be an evaluation. Staff is gonna be walking with Conservation District staff here in a couple of weeks, and we're gonna be walking the whole stream area, or creek area there, and, you know, kind of coming up with a plan. We figure there's kind of two approaches to this that we'd like to do. One, we'd like to incorporate some type of an overlay area, actually within the master plan, that talks about the importance of the vegetative buffers, where they're actually located, you know, map them out, particularly in these areas where you have the conflict between the creek and the built environment. So we'd like to identify that in there, so it's very clear that this is a priority. You know, what is a vegetative buffer, what's its purpose, you know, identifying in the plan, and then probably tweaking some of the language in the zoning ordinance as we need be. One of the things we thought that would be really helpful, when this process of site plan review comes, you review a plan, they get a land use permit, they get their building permits and so forth. At some point, that kind of fades and the business is established and they get a manager in there, and the manager talks to their landscaping business, their company that serves their business, and says, you know, clear cut that area out there. We always have the potential of doing that. We've talked about maybe having signs actually established, that maybe that signs would be out there and say that this area shall not be clear cut or removed or mowed per township ordinance or something like that. At least there's some physical markers out there to let people know that this is intended to be preserved as natural. We do allow, in the ordinance, it does allow for some selective trimming in there. Actually, ironic is the MSU Federal Credit Union contacted us and say, hey, we'd like to do some trimming there because we have some sight lines for people coming in and out of their credit union that can't see very good. You know, can we do that? And we're like, yes, you can do that. The ordinance allows for some of that so that it's managed in that area. We recognize that, you know, we don't want necessarily, you know, something that's overgrown. Plus, if there's invasive species in there, we want to be able to manage those as well. So there is that flexibility in the ordinance, but, you know, it's really important, I think, for the community that this remain a kind of protected area. So we think with the master plan approach, and certainly the timing of that right now works well, so that we could incorporate that into the master plan as an overlay, and then maybe revisit some of the zoning language. But in the meantime, we'll be working with the property owners. Like I said, we're have this as violations. We also want to see and help them to restore this. We would imagine that in the case of both Well Now and Fox Motors, that we would request that they come back to the Planning Commission with their plan to restore these particular areas.
Have they both been contacted?
We've been contacted with Fox Motors, so they are aware of it. We have not contacted Well Now yet.
We just discovered that one today.
That one's just today, so.
It looks to me like there's some pretty substantial herbicide. Look at those pictures. It wasn't just like clear cut out of there. Everything's dead.
Well, it was so thick that there was no sun down there until they took that
Do you
stuff all
think
out.
that's it? Yeah. I mean, there, you see little green patches, but you really don't, I don't know. That to me would be a pretty big violation that close to the creek if that was happening.
Like I said, we'll have that, when they do that walkthrough of that, you know, we'll
Yeah.
make sure that they'll look for any activity of that.
Well, I would encourage you, we contact everybody up and down that corridor, because what it appears is, well, they did it, let's do it.
Yeah.
Yep.
What about the next, well, they did it, let's
Contact them
do it.
quickly.
Let's put a stop to this. I mean, quite frankly, we need to make an example out of somebody. How big
Yeah.
a book can we throw at them? I'm literally, I mean, this is ridiculous.
I'm
This
with
is
you.
the third time now, in less than a year, or in about a year,
But
that
if you
this has
count,
happened.
Meyer did some clearing too, didn't
Mhm.
you know? I
Meyer
mean,
did back, I think, in about 2015 or 16, they did, and the township did respond to that, and that's filled in fairly good, so it can be recovered, but it's.
Takes time.
It takes time, and it's something we really don't want to spend our,
Well, I think Joe's right. they
Yeah.
need to spend some dollars on that.
Exactly.
or
Yep.
They need
Oh.
to have
Substantial,
a way for them to say,
Mhm.
that was
They
bad.
will be on the hook for restoring it. If they come back here and there's application fee to amend the site plan, they're on the hook for that.
I think
This
the
is- yeah.
signs, to me, that jumped out at me as the biggest, clearest solution, is if we do all that zoning stuff, which is important, but if we have signs that go up and it says, this area protected, and we could probably do that jointly with those business
Kids Creek
owners.
Restoration too.
And- Yep, and with the Watershed Center and with Garfield Township. And then, I think on top of that, have you thought of doing, or is there any discussion with the Watershed Center about some kind of press release? I think that there's a really positive story to be told here. I mean, it's bad what's happened to the creek, but I think it's really positive that Garfield Township is acting to protect the creek. There are other agencies that are acting to protect the creek, and of course, the zoning ordinance. And on top of that, it's a great opportunity for those businesses to get some positive press out of it, to say, oops, we're so sorry. But if you could have the Watershed Center just saying that they're doing, and the township saying that these business owners are really coming through, you know, I mean, I'm thinking it would be a great, I don't know if anybody listens to Points North on NPR, but they tell a lot of northern Michigan stories. You know,
Even just a way to spread awareness.
and yes, exactly, that's the
Yeah.
other thing, you know, so then next time somebody sees cutting going on, they might actually pick up the phone and call the township and say, hey, I thought they weren't supposed to cut adjacent to the creek.
And that's one of the things, even in talking with Watershed Center yesterday and getting some of their emails, is they obviously have like a circle of people like who are on their radar. They were getting a lot of people contacting them about like we've seen clear cutting around Kids Creek, and we said send them to us. And they even asked like, oh, we don't want to overload you. It's like, no, every single person who has a complaint, contact us.
Yeah.
The township is the enforcement agency. We can, as part of getting back with these property owners, at that point it becomes not just township officials, it's we have a dozen people who complain about your property because you did something you weren't supposed to. Like, this is frustrating for us on multiple levels. One, for that you took out landscaping that looked really nice and natural. Just the principle of having to go back to something that we have already approved, already reviewed, that should be wrapping up at this point, and having to go back to it. So I'm glad. I think looking forward, I think there will be a positive story to bring out of it, and to get some better awareness, and to show that this is it's a protected area and it needs to have that protection in place. I think that would be really good going forward.
in the short term, I think the well-crafted sign on both sides of the creek and every parcel that says there's no cutting of any kind within 30 feet or whatever it is of the creek,
35.
35 feet of this creek.
Per Garfield Township ordinance,
Per ordinance,
whatever.
you know, Bob's Yard Service that's contracted to come in and cut it down is gonna stop and go, hey, wait a minute, I can't do this. It's, you know, that may be that simple to at least curb it. If
Yep.
it stops one more of these,
Yeah.
this is just, it's sickening. And it's, when we talked about the Nicollet Bank, we said, how many more of these do we have to endure? And now 2 more have happened, and it's not stopping.
And I don't think anybody's doing it maliciously, or, you know, they just don't know.
It's ignorance, I
It's sad
think.
they lose track
How
of
else do you
rules.
put it? It's frustrating.
I agree with everything I've been hearing, and I do think, though, for sure, we can't let crime pay. So people that did that cannot just get away with a fine of a few $100. That's a slap on the wrist. They've got to basically restore, and that's going to
Yep.
cost them some money.
They will.
But it's serious
They're required
restoration.
to, yep.
Yeah, so in effect, they will rue the day they did what they did.
Right. And I think bringing the expertise of both Watershed Center Conservation District, knowing kind of like all the native plantings, we did sort of ask them to provide some technical expertise and guidance, mostly like there's going to be native things that are going to be helpful for the creek, and hopefully a lot of different native plants that maybe don't grow as tall. Like if this helps the business owners with visibility, then they don't have to go in there and mess with it at all, and then it can still just be what it is and protect the creek like it's supposed to. Like, find a solution that's gonna work for all parties in this, but this, what you're seeing in these photos is unacceptable.
All right.
So this will be a continuing item that you're going to bring materials to us as you're able to compile a master plan.
Keep updating, and especially when we do get their attention and say that they have to restore, they will most likely have to come back here with an updated plan, because
Yeah.
we looked back at the approved plans, and luckily we had them because they were just recent, and they said existing vegetation to remain, riparian buffer along Kids Creek to remain,
Yeah.
and it did not remain, so they have to amend their own plans.
So you guys will plan on giving us an updated report in a couple of weeks?
Mhm. Yep.
Yes.
We can
So
update
when
you
they
on that.
come back with a plan, can
Mhm.
we require that they have gone through the watershed center or some other expertise that knows what plants ought to be there and
Mhm.
reviews those plans and make sure that that's the kind of vegetation we want there?
Mhm.
Not just go out and buy a bunch of arborvitae and stick them in there,
Correct.
because
Yep.
that's not what we want.
Yeah, that's why I think the one that I think we're really gonna rely on is the Conservation District.
Conservation
They've done a
District,
lot of
yeah.
work,
Perfect,
with the
yeah.
restoration of the
Yeah.
Boardman River and those.
Boulder
with the-
Creek.
They know the
did a
native
restoration.
species.
Right, so that's who staff is gonna be walking with here in a week or so when we're out there. And so, and we'd like to have them to have direct contact with the property owners to give guidance and instruction on how to kind of restore these areas. So fortunately, it's something that can be restored, but it does have to be done the right way.
Great.
So if one of these lots were vacant and they didn't have a special use permit on them, they didn't do anything illegal, you could do that
No.
on a vacant lot. There's
There's an ordinance.
land.
The ordinance protects the creek.
35 feet
no matter
on
how-
each side.
Mhm.
no matter what land it is,
Oh, yeah,
just
it's-
that creek, not every creek in the township.
No, everyone, yeah, it's a
Every creek.
riparian buffer from lakes and streams in the township.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we can't go down by the lake and cut trees within 35 feet?
Can't cut it
This
like
is,
that.
it's a stream, so.
But not lakes.
Lakes are different. I don't think
They have
that's-
something in there. I don't know if it's the exact
We'd have
same
to
as.
I guess I
Well,
didn't know any of this.
Right.
I would want to go down, or if it gets overgrown, and want to go clear it out, I would have never thought that. I know you can't disturb the soil,
Yeah.
but you'd always been able to cut anything above the ground.
And there's
So-
like beaches on the lake too.
Yeah, so I'm not sure on the lake, because that might be
Yeah.
under, there's that portion of the ordinance has some different provisions. It's all wrapped in with like the wetlands buffer and so forth. But on streams, it's a 35-foot.
Some of it's
And
based
it
on high
applies,
water
because
mark.
these
I was ready to
actually,
take the weed whacker down by the lake and take care, and some, anyway.
Double check with us, yeah. before you do
I think
that.
I might still do it.
Yeah. Yeah, and some of that's on lake dependent on like high water mark too, that they're defined, so, we can check that. But yeah, before you go do that, you might want to check with the ordinance on that.
All right.
All right, looking ahead on the agenda, we've got our items for the next agenda, which would be our meeting in 2 weeks from tonight. Gonna keep working on the master plan update and keep working on some revisions to possibly R2, R3 zoning districts, as discussed, I guess, right?
yes, we'll actually have some draft language for those potential changes for you to consider. And yeah, on the master plan, we talked last month about these districts, nodes, and corridors. We're gonna actually provide you with some draft language for that, and start looking at that future land use map and see where we want to make some changes. Not just in locations of where residential, commercial, industrial go, but also some of the classifications that we have. And there we want to kind of, at this point, it's just conversations. But we have some ideas. We want to kind of have that kind of conversation with you on the 23rd.
Sounds good.
Any update on the driveway on the north side of Myers? Joe asked about last meeting.
Yeah, so we've been in contact with Meyer. Actually, I'll probably have a meeting with them next week. They're gonna have to amend that PUD. Most likely, it'll have to be a minor amendment, so coming back to the planning commission, because I've talked with the general contractor out there, and it may be that becomes a permanent closure. And if so, then that's gonna kind of reconfigure that area.
Looks pretty permanent right now.
Well, Yeah, and that's fine if they want to, if, you know, there are 3 driveways on that north side of Meyer where they could have access out to Frankie. We just need to know what that plan is going to be. Complicates it a little bit more because that north parking lot is within the city. So they're most likely are going to have to do a kind of a 2-plan process, go through us and go through the city. But we just need some kind of overall plan for that. That has not been closed out, that particular project, so we've asked for them to provide a $10,000 escrow until they go through that process, because if we do have to remove that gate, we want to make sure that it's removed. So that's kind of also gives them reason to start moving on amending that plan.
What's their purpose for blocking it, did they say?
I think initially, my guess is that they initially blocked it because that was a major staging area
Right.
for a lot of their equipment. And I think, I don't know for the full reason, but just talking with the general contractor, partly is the way that pharmacy comes out, circulation in that, and having a clear view over to that area. Also, their loading dock area is over there as well. I don't know if that has any part to that as well, but, you know, you have some tractor trailers that are backing up into that area that potentially block that. But I don't know for certain.
Don't
We
they
just
have
want to see
loading
what their
docks
plan
on the
is.
south side? On the back, down on the south side?
That's where the,
Yeah.
that's,
Yeah, they got a
that's
bunch of
all,
loading
that's
here,
that's
too.
grocery receiving on this
Yeah,
side.
But that's something else.
there's a
maybe
smaller
that's-
one up there.
That's for
uh,
their plants and things, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, probably for plants and any, you know, home goods and that type of thing. Are
Or-
probably
or
coming, yeah,
General merchandise.
general merchandise.
Yeah, it just changes the whole flow of the project. It's
Mm-hmm.
not unlike what we're talking about at Sam's, you know, let's, if
Yeah.
they want to amend the plan, fine, but that needs to come to us, I think.
Yeah, I mean, whatever that is going to be, we just need to see the end game here. It's kind of temporary there, but has the potential to be permanent. Whatever it is, we just need to see what they're planning to do and go through that process.
Do you think you'll have an update for us in 2 weeks on that, or is that maybe
Yes.
further down the road?
I should. I'm anticipating they having a meeting here shortly with Meyer and their representatives.
Okay, so updates on Meyer and the Kitts Creek.
And I've already been in contact with the city planner regarding that part to the north, which is in the city. I would think that they would want to be party to that, because it could potentially impact them as well.
Is that parking lot part of the Meyer PUD? It's not part of our PUD.
It's
Or
not part of our
planned shopping center.
PUD, but it's part of the shopping center. The car wash is separate ownership altogether. So it is under the jurisdiction of the city. The city, I think, just has it as commercial zoning.
I would think the fire department should have probably know about that too, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, I think so.
If they abandon it
Absolutely.
or sign off.
I do, you know, being a little bit more familiar with this project as it's gone through, I definitely see the cut-through traffic going there
Oh, yeah.
between Frankie Road and South, or 31 there at the
But
at
they're
the
gonna do
light.
it anyway, but they're gonna go around the car wash, and that's skinny.
Well,
Well, there's still 2 there.
There's a
another
middle
one.
one there potentially, and if that's the one that's right across from the Montessori school.
Yeah.
I'm actually wondering, would that have been a reason to, do you know if, like, road commission or anyone weighed in on that? To specifically close one to make flow into the Montessori easier?
You mean in terms of why that driveway at Meyer was closed?
Yeah. Was that
No,
purely Meyer's decision?
That was Meyer. I think
Oh,
it was
okay.
because of their staging that
That
they
was
were
all
doing for
them.
all their
Okay.
development there.
Didn't know if that was like, allow left turns into the Montessori.
Yeah, I think it was just to avoid having
Okay.
vehicles through there.
Okay.
Anything else we should be talking about?
That's enough.
We adjourn?
Everybody's
Yeah.
Adjourned.
10 o'clock.
All right.